All right, I declare we do have quorum. Brandon Stapleton couldn't make it electronically or in person, but the rest of the committee is here. I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe under the terms of the Robertson-Huron Treaty number 61 of 1850 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. We commit to acknowledge, learn, educate, create opportunity, honor sacred spaces, and take actions towards real truth and reconciliation in support of our commitment to walking the path together in respect, peace, and harmony for future generations. All right, I have a motion moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that the Committee of Adjustment agenda dated September 14, 2022 be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All in favor? And that's carried. Before I move on, we have a new member of our planning team, Kelsey Lang, which is over here. Many of the public can't see her, but Kelsey's here, and she's joining our team permanently, and she's desperately needed and wanted. All right, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that the Committee of Adjustment meeting minutes dated July 13, 2022, and the recommendations contained therein be hereby adopted as printed and circulated. All in favor? And that's carried. All right. I'd like to welcome everyone to the public meetings to consider applications for minor variances to the zoning bylaw. The input received by agencies, public, and staff is important in order for the committee to make sound planning decisions. The procedure to be followed in these meetings will be as follows. A brief explanation of the application and any correspondence received to date will be given by staff. The applicant or the representative will be asked to provide any additional comments without repeating the information already outlined by staff. Any members of the public present, in person or electronically, will then be permitted to ask questions or provide comments respecting the applications. Any persons making representation are first requested to state their name and mailing address, and please note that presentations are limited to 10 minutes. Once the hearing is concluded, the input received will be considered by the committee prior to making a decision on the applications. And if you wish to be notified of a decision of the committee, you must file a written request for notification. And Madeline is starting us off with 7 Lake Drive.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'll just set up the screen. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property is located at 7 Lake Drive. The lot is designated urban shoreline residential within the Huntsville settlement area in Huntsville's official plan and zoned residential 1 under Huntsville zoning. It should be noted that the Town of Huntsville's community planning permit bylaw was passed by council in July 2022, but is currently under appeal and not yet in full force and effect. The subject lands are contained within the urban residential shoreline precinct in the CPP bylaw. The application is to permit the reconstruction of the existing dwelling and to expand an attached deck on the lot. The dwelling proposed to be reconstructed and expanded is considered a legal non-complying structure. The dwelling was constructed in 1976 with various alterations completed up until 2007, which included the construction of the deck, now proposed to be expanded. The minor variance is required to recognize the location of the existing dwelling and attached deck, permit a 3-meter increase in height for a legal non-complying dwelling, and reduce the front yard setback from 30 meters to 13 meters for a deck addition and additional building height. The minor variance will be conditional on the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer, and this will be implemented through site plan control or a community planning permit to the satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville. Based on the configuration of the property, the proposed reconstruction of the dwelling and deck expansion is sited in the most suitable location. The proposal uses the existing foundation and remaining within the maximum height requirement to add an additional story. The deck expansion uses the existing front yard setback and does not come closer to the shoreline. The variance requested will not likely result in any significant impact to abutting landowners. Additionally, a condition has been added to revegetate along the shoreline, which will assist in providing additional vegetation and minimize the visual impact of the dwelling. Having regard to the provisions in the community planning permit bylaw, this proposal would be in keeping with the identified precinct and policies contained in the CPP, provided revegetation of the shoreline is completed to the satisfaction of the town as a condition of the permit issuance. Looking at the official plan, the proposed reconstruction has been designed to meet the character of the area by maintaining the existing location and staying within the maximum height. In this instance, the reconstructed dwelling will be built on the existing foundation, and the deck expansion will not worsen the non-compliance. As the reconstructed dwelling will not be coming closer to the shoreline and will involve revegetating the shoreline, any impacts to water quality will be mitigated and a net improvement is gained. The reconstruction and expansion is also to be located in a clear, flat area, so adverse impacts on steep slopes and blasting will be avoided. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Fairy Lake Association. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. No? Yep.
There we go. Good morning, Committee of Adjustment, John P. Gallagher and Associates. Here on behalf of Dr. Sasson and his wife, who've recently purchased the land on Lake Drive. I think Madeline has outlined the application extensively. There's just a few points that I'd like to touch on. The location of the cottage was built in the most reasonable spot. Just to the rear of the cottage, there's a large granite outcrop that almost goes all the way up to Lake Drive. So with the increase in height, that actually helps minimize the visual impact. The use of the additional floor space is desirable given the existing layout, size, and location of the existing dwelling. They've purchased the lands and intend on retiring to this location. It was legally built in its current location on the lot. It's on a year-round municipal road with full municipal services. The proposal takes advantage of an existing setback that has existed for many years. They prefer not to have to blast on the property, and so they're going to tear it down to the foundation and then rebuild up from the foundation. It's minor in the fact that the replacement dwelling is in the same footprint, and one of the things on the site plan on the western side, there's an existing deck off to the side and stairs. That'll be removed as part of the overall development. The natural spot for the stairs is on the east side of the property. The additions or the changes are not coming closer to the adjacent properties. The size of the addition is minor, as the principal lot coverage will be around 6.5%, well below the permitted 35% of the lot. The proposal supports compact form of development. The existing driveway will continue to be utilized. It keeps the intent of the zoning as single-family dwelling and accessory structures are permitted uses. It is logical to allow the addition in the same general area of the dwelling, utilizing existing cleared areas and not clearing any additional land. The proposal, the location has the least impact on the land. It's currently clear to vegetation is most logical for the rebuilding. The existing vegetation adjacent the water course will be maintained on the lot. The owners have retained Jen from Rockscape to prepare a revegetation plan, and the owners and her are working through that, and that will be a condition of the approval. The height of the building will meet the zoning bylaw. There are a number of conifers along the front that will minimize the view of the building. The form will not dominate the landscape. It is an extra wide lot and a large lot. And the owners have retained and continue to maintain the site in a natural setting. There's been no objection to the application. I'd be glad to answer any questions should you have any. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll call on members of the public, either present or electronically. You'll have to raise your electronic hand. But any member of the public that wishes to speak to this application? Seeing
Chair, so
none.
I see no hands raised.
Thank you. Members of the committee, any comments or questions? All right, seems too easy. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A 40-2022 HTE be approved. The purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 3.13.1, 5.2.4, and 3.13.2 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to recognize the location of the existing dwelling and attached deck, permit a 3-meter increase in height for a legal non-complying dwelling, and reduce the front yard setback from 30 meters to 13 meters for a deck addition and additional building height. Conditional on the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer to be implemented through site plan control or a community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right, Madeline, you're speaking to the next one, Florence Holding Company Limited.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property is located on Florence Street West. The civic addressing has not been finalized for the property, however, some may recognize it as Horizon Lane. The lot is designated mixed-use area within the Huntsville Urban Settlement Area in Huntsville's official plan and zoned residential 4 with exception 1100 under Huntsville's zoning bylaw. It should also be noted that the Town of Huntsville's community planning permit bylaw was passed by council in July 2022, but is currently under appeal and not yet in full force and effect. The subject lands are contained within the urban mixed-use precinct in the CPP bylaw. The application is to permit the construction of a detached 2-story garage with 2 attached carports on the lot. A minor variance is required to reduce the easterly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 3.2 meters for a 79-meter square 2-story building consisting of a ground-story garage with residential dwelling unit above, and reduce the easterly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 3.8 meters for 2 144-meter square carport structures only. The minor variance is conditional on maintaining a 2-meter wide vegetative buffer along the easterly side lot lines to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. On June 25th, 2001, a site plan agreement was approved to permit a townhouse development on the subject lands consisting of 16 2-story townhouse dwelling units with basement secondary residential dwelling units in each. A site plan agreement amendment application will be required should this application be viewed favorably by committee. The proposed use is in keeping with the site-specific permissions, and the development appears to generally meet all of the relevant provisions of the zoning bylaw. With the residential unit on the 2nd story of the garage, the site will contain 33 units overall and accommodate sheltered parking for all units. The proposal is sited in the most suitable location, given the location of the entrance to the site and the current site layout. Additionally, maintaining a 2-meter wide vegetative buffer along the easterly interior side yard has been added as a condition to provide additional screening. If the CPP bylaw was in effect, a Class 3 permit would be required to authorize this development, as the proposed setback variation for the two-story garage is greater than 20%. Having regard to the CPP bylaw, the recommendations outlined in this report are in keeping with the identified precinct and policies contained within the CPP. Looking at the official plan, the mixed-use area designation, which encourages development that will contribute to the well-being and cohesiveness of the community in a compact form. In this instance, the proposed garage and carport structures are contributing to the functionality of the development on the lot while being compact and cohesive with the existing site characteristics. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and the application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. Nobody's coming down. Do we have anybody electronically putting their hand up?
No hands raised, Chair Stone.
All right. Then I will ask any members of the public that wish to speak to this application, in person or electronically.
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
Thank you. All right. Committee members, comments or questions? Helena Renwick.
Chair Stone, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it on? Yeah. The Class 3 setback, can you explain what that is, just for my information?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
through you,
Sure.
Chair Stone.
Yeah.
So the Class 3 would permit, it would be greater than a 20% variation.
Right.
So because the setback required is 6 meters, as well, in the CPP as well. But because the reduction is greater than 20% of 6 meters, it would have to be escalated to a Class 3 permit.
And that's new?
That would be in the CPP bylaw.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
just
Right.
Bringing it forward as if we were looking at it under the community planning permit, that's how we would look at this application.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thanks. Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Just to elaborate further on that, I guess, anything that is Class 3 has to come to committee.
Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
Seeing no other comments? Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A41 2022 HTE be approved. The purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsection 3.1.15.3 and 5.2.4 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to reduce the easterly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 3.2 meters for a 79 square meter, 2-story building consisting of a ground story garage with residential dwelling unit above, and reduce the easterly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 3.8 meters for a 144 square meter carport structures only. Conditional on maintaining a 2-meter wide vegetative buffer along the easterly side lot lines to be implemented through site plan control or the community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. Madeline, 200 Echo Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 200 Echo Bay Road. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and zoned rural 2 under Huntsville zoning bylaw. The subject lines are contained within the waterfront backlot precinct in the community planning permit bylaw. An application has been submitted to permit the construction of a single detached residential dwelling with an attached garage on the lot. A minor variance is required to reduce the front yard setback from 30 meters to 18 meters, reduce the setback from type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 18 meters both for a single detached dwelling, and recognize the location of an existing dryland boathouse within 13 meters of the shoreline and closer to the shoreline than the principal dwelling. The minor variance will be conditional on the owner closing and purchasing the original road shore allowance, the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer, and the owner implementing all mitigation measures and recommendations contained within the fish habitat assessment dated July 2022, prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services, all to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. In this instance, due to the large lot size, mature vegetation, and development siting, the proposal does not dominate the physical landscape and will reflect that of the surrounding area. A Class 2 permit would be required to authorize the proposal, and a technical report, as was submitted in this instance, would be necessary. Having regard to the provisions of the CPP bylaw, staff would recommend approval of the variation in this instance if the CPP bylaw was in effect. Looking at the official plan, the waterfront designation anticipates linear, low-density shoreline residential development that respects the character and natural setting of the waterfront area. The proposal is in keeping with the character of the waterfront area, as the proposed dwelling is sited outside of steep slope areas, and recommendations have been provided by Frycorp Ecological Services to ensure that there are no negative impacts to water quality resulting from the development. The reduced setback for the proposed dwelling to the shoreline and to Type 1 fish habitat will be mitigated largely by the mature vegetation along the shoreline. Conditions have been recommended to require implementation of all mitigation measures and recommendations outlined in the report, and to implement a revegetation plan to enhance areas along the shoreline with additional vegetation. A revegetation plan was prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Fairy Lake Association. 2 letters of support were received by neighboring property owners. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. Call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. And he's on his way.
Good morning, staff.
Good morning.
Jeff Lovegrove, Lovegrove Construction. I'll just have a couple comments. We've worked really hard on the design to fit the new build into most of the footprint on the existing build. The big issues, I don't know if you can see from the photos, is that there's a 100-foot cliff right behind the building with an allowance, so we really don't have any other location to build the building. The positive things about this is we're moving the septic from the point, the existing septic from the point. And it's going to be a very extensive septic system because it's probably about 400 feet away on top of that hill. So we're doing all those provisions because we don't really have any other options. So it's a good, our plan is solid, and I think it improves the whole area. So any comments or questions I can answer.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I'll call on members of the public, present or electronically, that want to speak to this application.
I see no hands raised, Chair Stone.
Thank you. Committee members, comments or questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you. Moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A42, 2022 HTE be approved, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 5.8.4, 3.5.1, and 3.1.18.10 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw, 2008 66P. Yes, they make me read that every time. 2, reduce the front yard setback from 30 meters to 18 meters. Reduce the setback from Type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 18 meters, both for a single detached dwelling. And recognize the location of a existing dryland boathouse within 13 meters of the shoreline and closer to the shoreline than the principal dwelling. conditional on the owner closing and purchasing the original Shore Road allowance, the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer area, and the owner implementing all mitigation measures and recommendations contained within the fish habitat assessment dated July 2022, prepared by FRI Corp Ecological Services, all to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Final comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right, Madeline, 131 Town Line.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 131 Town Line Road East. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and zoned Shoreline Residential 4 under Huntsville's zoning bylaw. The subject lands are contained within the waterfront residential 120 meters precinct in the community planning permit. The application is to permit the construction of an addition to the existing dwelling and a new boathouse on the lot. A minor variance is required to reduce the required setback to type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 0 meters to permit the construction of a boathouse, reduce the westerly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.8 meters for an addition to the dwelling, and increase the primary lot coverage as calculated on the portion of the lot within 90 meters of the shoreline from 5% to 7.01%. The minor variance is conditional on the owner removing the existing shed and landing within the 15-meter shoreline buffer, the owner removing the existing floating dock, the owner removing the existing shipping container structure on the property or obtaining a building permit to permit it to stay, the owner removing one of the paths through the shoreline buffer, the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer in the area of the shed, path, and stairway that are to be removed, and the owner maintaining the existing treed vegetation along the westerly interior side yard, and the owner implementing all mitigation measures outlined in the fish habitat assessment dated August 24th, 2022, prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services, all to be implemented through site plan control or a community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. The proposed addition to the dwelling is sited in the most suitable location as it utilizes the current location of an existing deck. The proposed addition is slightly larger than the original deck and includes enclosing the bottom portion under the deck. The current dwelling is legal non-complying. The proposed addition allows for an improvement by reducing primary lot coverage from the current 7.46% to 7.01% within 90 meters of the shoreline. The reduction in the interior side yard setback will be increasing from the current 4.8 meters to 2.8 meters. To maintain visual screening, a condition has been added to maintain the existing vegetation along the westerly side yard. In terms of the shoreline, the existing dock, shed, and landing will be removed, and a condition has been added to address this. To ensure the shoreline buffer is kept in a natural state outside of the amenity areas, a condition is recommended to require disturbed areas to be revegetated. Currently, there are 2 paths to the shoreline. A condition has also been recommended to eliminate one of the paths. It was noticed that a shipping container is placed at the entrance of the property without benefit of a site plan or building permits. A condition is recommended to require that structure to be removed or that a building permit be obtained to permit it to stay. In this instance, having regard for the provisions of the CPP bylaw, a Class 3 permit approval would be required to authorize a variation from these minimum requirements. If the CPP bylaw was in effect, staff would recommend that council approve the proposed variation to the waterfront residential lot requirements. Based on the configuration of the proposal on the site, minimal visual impacts from the water should occur, as the addition to the dwelling will be screened by the mature trees in the shoreline buffer. The addition reflects the scale of the current dwelling and surrounds waterfront residential character. Natural constraint mapping identifies type 1 and type 2 fish habitat and sloping of various degrees. The proposed addition is set back significantly from type 1 Type 1 fish habitat, and within flat areas of the site. As the proposed location of the boathouse is within 30 meters of Type 1 fish habitat, a fish habitat assessment was prepared by Frycorp Ecological Services, which outlines that the proposed boathouse will not have any cumulative negative impacts on the general fish habitat in Fairy Lake or the area previously identified as Type 1. A condition has been added to ensure all mitigation measures and recommendations outlined in the report are followed and implemented. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Fairy Lake Association. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. Calling the applicant or representative, Mr. Lovegrove once again. Hi. Can you turn the mic on? Perfect.
So we retained Bob McDermott, OLS survey to verify the lot lines before we started any design work. And that's when it came to our attention that the existing building was built over the permitted setback. So what we've done, we've bumped out a little area for a barbecue, but what we're doing, basically this whole application is a cleanup application. We're recognizing that the building wasn't in compliance in the side yard. And rather than coming back to you guys in a year, I talked to the clients and saying, let's do the whole thing for the future boathouse and everything, so it's just one application, and so forth. The only other comment I'm gonna make is the shipping container was dropped off there last week because we put all their personal belongings in there because we did obtain a demo permit yesterday or Monday. So it's just temporary. It will be removed once we're using it for the construction and stuff over the winter.
That's great news. Thank you. All right, I'll call on members of the public, in person or electronically, that want to speak to this application.
I see no hands raised.
Thank you. Committee members, any comments or questions? Mr. Donald?
Thank you, Chair Stone. Through you to possibly Marilyn or to you, Jeff. We're really approving provision for a boathouse. The boathouse is not been designed yet, is that correct?
We've done a couple concepts, but right now I've got my plate full just with the cottage construction, so I told them I couldn't even look at boathouse for 2 years, so.
Okay, so there will be a subsequent application for approval of the boathouse through the appropriate committee?
Basically, that we're asking that if you look at the application, that's the approximate location the boathouse will go.
Yep.
The boathouse will comply to all the zoning bylaws and building requirements and so forth.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments? Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Chair Stone. I appreciate that the shipping container is temporary, and that happens a lot during construction. I don't know if Alan can answer or our CBO would like to intervene. What is the policy on shipping containers? I'm unfamiliar with our policy, so just for personal reference.
Mr. Nagy?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Stone, we've taken the stance that if they put a shipping container on as an accessory structure and it meets all of those requirements, it could be permitted on a lot. And we do look for a building permit to actually site it within the proper location, so.
Thank you. Ms.
Through you,
Renwick?
thank you. Through you, Chair Stone. I guess to Madeline, you had mentioned that there are 2 paths that go down towards the shoreline. One of them needs to be removed. Is that correct? Is that
Yeah, so through you, Chair Stone. In the zoning bylaw, they're permitted 1 2-meter wide pathway to the shoreline through the shoreline buffer. However, in this instance, there's a landscaped steps down to the shoreline, but also a footpath. So just one of those paths would be permitted.
And just further to that, in the diagrams, there's is that a boat launch that's next to the structure that's going to be removed? The shed that's there now, or that little, and right to the left of it, or to the right of it, there's that sort of incline?
Would
Is
it be of assistance if I brought up the site plan?
Yeah, could you just for my own curiosity, just looking at what it is?
Thank you. Is there a general area?
Well, if you actually look at the photograph that you have
Oh.
of the shed. Thank you. Yeah, the one that's there in the top right-hand corner.
Yep.
So that's the structure that's going to be removed. And then
Yes.
next to that, that little, whatever that is next to it, to the right of it. Is that-
Yeah, Jeff, would you be
Yeah,
comfortable
all
commenting?
that will be removed.
all.
We're gonna get rid of the wood steps and do actually stone steps and make it look more natural, leading to the boathouse. So that'll all there'll be a demo permit for that when we start the boathouse.
Right, okay. Quite the project. Thank you.
I do have a question, and I don't know who it's for, but we're increasing the lot coverage from 5 to 7.01%. Is it not appropriate we reduce the accessory structure amount as well?
So we did consider that with this application. However, the proposed size of the future proposed boathouse, and there's a treehouse on the lot as well, so the accessory structures are at 5%.
So that would be the only two accessory structures on the property
Yep,
after all said and done?
if the shipping container is removed,
Yeah,
which,
well, it
yeah,
will be removed.
it will be. So, yeah, those will be the only two accessory structures.
All right, that's great. Yeah, I can live with that. Any other comments or questions? All right. Moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Helena Renwick. Be it resolved that minor variance application A43, 2022 HTE be approved, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 3.5.1, 5.3.4, and 5.3.4 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to reduce the required setback from type 1 fish habitat from 30 meters to 0 meters to permit the construction of a boathouse. Reduce the westerly interior side yard setback from 6 meters to 2.8 meters for an addition to the dwelling, and increase the primary lot coverage as calculated on the portion of the lot located within 90 meters of the shoreline from 5% to 7.01%. Conditional on the owner removing the existing shed and landing within 15 meters shoreline buffer, the owner removing the existing floating dock, the owner removing the existing shipping container structure on the property or obtaining a building permit to permit it to stay, the owner removing one of the paths through the shoreline buffer, the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer in the area that the shed, path, and stairway are to be removed, and the owner maintaining the existing tree vegetation along the westerly interior side yard, and the owner implementing all mitigation measures outlined in the Fish Habitat Assessment dated August 4th, 2022, prepared by FRI Corp. Ecological Services, all to be implemented through site plan control or the community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. 35 West Wasiosa, Madeline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 35 West Wasiosa Lake Road. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and zoned shoreline residential 5 under Huntsville zoning bylaw. The subject lines are contained within the waterfront residential 120 meters precinct in the community planning permit bylaw. An application has been submitted to permit the construction of a single detached dwelling and one-story detached garage on the lot. A minor variance is required to reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 22 meters for a single detached dwelling, reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 20 meters for an attached deck, and permit an open stairway to encroach to a minimum distance of 18.5 meters from the shoreline. The minor variance will be conditional on the owner removing the frame shed, wood shed, and outhouse, the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer in the areas where the accessory structures and dwelling are to be removed, and both are to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town. The proposed dwelling is sited in the most suitable location as it moves further from the shoreline and will be located on flat ground. The size and scale of the proposed dwelling will reflect that of the surrounding area and be visually screened by the vegetation along the shoreline. As such, the variance requested will not likely result in any significant impacts to abutting landowners. To ensure the shoreline buffer is kept in a natural state outside of the amenity areas, conditions have been added to require the owner to remove the existing structures and to revegetate in the area where the accessory structures and dwelling are to be removed. In this case, having regard to the provisions of the CPP bylaw, a Class 2 permit would be required to authorize the proposed variation from this requirement. Staff would recommend approval of the proposed variation if the CPP bylaw was in effect. Looking at the official plan, the subject lands are included in the waterfront designation. Guidelines in this designation promote development of buildings that are sited in the most appropriate areas on the lot, limited in terms of massing and coverage in relation to the size and frontage of the property, and designed in keeping with the character of the surrounding area. The proposed dwelling and attached deck respect the character of the waterfront area and has not proposed to overdevelop the lot by staying within the height and lot coverage restrictions. Natural constraint mapping identifies type 2 fish habitat as well as Lake Wasiosa being a cold water lake containing lake trout habitat. The proposal will mitigate effects to type 2 fish habitat as the dwelling will move further from the shoreline, creating a larger buffer for vegetation and stormwater runoff, as well as including additional vegetation. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Lake Wasiosa Ratepayers Association. 2 letters of support were received from neighboring property owners and circulated to committee before the meeting. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. Hi. Oh, hang on a sec. Put your microphone up. No, by all means, sit down. So I'm just going to say, please put your microphone on.
Sorry. I'm George Klump. I'm the owner of the property.
Okay.
I don't really have any comments, but I'm open to any questions you might have.
Perfect. Thank you for being here. All right, members of the public that have any comments or questions about this? Anything electronically?
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
All right. Committee members, comments or questions? All right then. Moved by Helena Renwick, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A44 2022 HTE be approved, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 5.3.4 and 3.1.8.2 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 22 meters for a single detached dwelling, reduce the minimum required front yard setback from 30 meters to 20 meters for an attached deck, and permit an open stairway to encroach to a maximum distance of 18.5 meters from the shoreline, conditional on the owner removing the frame shed, wood shed, and outhouse, and the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer in areas where the accessory structures and dwelling were to be removed, both to be implemented through site plan control or the community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. All in favor? And that's carried. All right, Madeline, 190 Yale's Nature Walk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 190 Yale's Nature Walk. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and zoned shoreline residential 5 with exception 1029 and natural resource with exception 1036 under Huntsville zoning bylaw. The subject lines are contained within the waterfront residential 120 meters and flood zone precincts in the community planning permit bylaw. An application has been submitted to recognize an existing dryland boathouse and to permit an existing boardwalk pathway and wood deck within the natural resource zone. In 2001, a site plan application was submitted for the construction of a 1-story detached garage on the lot. Through the review process, it was determined that a dryland boathouse, a boardwalk pathway to the shoreline, and a wood deck were all constructed in a non-complying locations by a previous owner and were not lawfully established. A minor variance is required to recognize an existing 7.9 meter squared dryland boathouse located closer to the shoreline than than the principal dwelling on a lot, and to permit an existing 71 meter square boardwalk pathway and 30 meter square wood deck only within a natural resource zone. The minor variance will be conditional on the owner removing a 2.9 meter square frame shed to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Site-specific zoning on the property established the minimum lot coverage for accessory buildings at 2.5% and the minimum yard requirement from a watercourse as 30 meters, as well as stating that a maximum of 1 dock is permitted. Development is generally prohibited within the natural resource zone, except for flood or erosion control facilities, parks, and non-complying structures. As this area is prone to flooding, the boardwalk pathway allows for access down to the shoreline while not disrupting the areas and vegetation around it. The boardwalk, wood deck, and dryland boathouse do not dominate the natural resource zone and increase the functionality of the space. The dryland boathouse has been constructed on top of a wood deck, maintaining similar construction to the boardwalk and dock, being low impact and avoiding aggravation in flooding conditions. On shoreline properties, a maximum of 3 roofed accessory structures are permitted. To ensure compliance with this requirement, the frame shed beside the wood deck along the boardwalk pathway is proposed to be removed to allow for the detached garage, and a condition has been added to ensure this. In this case, having regards to the provisions of the CPP bylaw, a Class 2 permit approval would be required to authorize the proposed variation from this requirement. Staff would recommend approval of the proposed variation if the CPP bylaw was in effect. Looking at the official plan, the subject lands are included in the waterfront designation. In this instance, the dryland boathouse and boardwalk are screened from view from Fox Lake by the dense vegetation that surrounds them. The proposed garage will be sited between the dwelling and Yale's Nature's Walk and will be screened by vegetated areas and from the dwelling. The proposal is in keeping with the character of the lot and surrounding waterfront residential character. Natural constraint mapping identifies sloping of various degrees and flood hazard. The proposal does not interfere with any steep slopes on the lot, and the proposed garage will be sited in a flat and level area. The areas within the identified flood zone are low-lying, and in this instance, the boardwalk pathway and wood deck allow for flood water to rise and fall without disturbing the path or surrounding area and vegetation. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Fox Lake Association. 2 letters of support were provided from neighboring property owners and circulated to committee before the meeting. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks very much. And I see the applicant's representative on his way.
Thank you. John P. Gallagher and Associates, 24 Hibbard Road, Huntsville, P1H, 1C9. And I'm here on behalf of Dr. Lapierre and his partner. And I think she may be online and may want to say a few words after I'm done. I think Madeline has outlined the application exceptionally well. The proposal is to recognize a small shed near the waterfront, and it's to store water-related equipment. The wooden walkway provides access down to the shoreline. The soil, as you get closer to the water, can be sometimes spongy, so it was wise of them to elevate the walkway. That way it allows for the water to continue to run through. You still have your vegetative buffer below the walkway, and the water is permeating through that ground underneath it. The shed at the water is very small. It's only about 85 square feet. As the house is a significant distance from the water, the owners like to keep their shoreline tidy and not scattered with water toys, etc. The actual shed is about 11 meters from the water's edge. There is significant vegetation retention throughout the lot. I think those photographs make a good example of shoreline and site vegetation retention. The scale of the shed is very small with respect to the shoreline activity area. It's in close proximity to the dock, and it's only about 8 feet high. In theory, the owner has the rights to build a large boathouse in the water, but given the water depth, a small shed makes more sense in this instance. The application is minor as the shed doesn't impact any neighbors. We've got letters of support from the neighbors. The scale and the height of the building is very small. It's barely visible from the dock given the vegetation between. If this were a gazebo, it would be permitted as a right and could be built on the dock. The shed does not really impact with the shoreline activity area as they all fall within the 15-meter width. The overall coverage for the accessory structures, including the proposed garage, is about 3%. And the principal dwelling is about 3.3%, which is well below the permitted coverage. The walkway was constructed to the waterfront as a means of not disturbing the natural lay of the land. It avoided the pond area and provided buffers from that. Walkways are a common form of access on wet or spongy lands. It's a technique used by Ontario Parks and municipalities in low-lying parkland areas. It is a low-profile structure that cannot be seen from the water due to the vegetation in front. Once we get past the deck, it's beyond the 15-meter setback. On the site, the natural landscape prevails. The dwelling is set back in excess of the zoning requirements, and vegetation has been retained throughout the site, minimizing any visual impact. The walkway is low profile. The 25% activity area frontage is the target that we've met. The official plan supports access and pathways to the water. Far more damage would be done if access had to be excavated into the land and asphalted or stoned. Although the deck is not permeable, it allows water to run off it and permeate through the soil below. The variance is conformed to the intent of the zoning bylaw. The bylaw would allow for a shed to be called a gazebo in this case, provided it's no greater than 162 square feet. It would also allow a large boathouse taken up to 10 meters of the width of the frontage. The intent of the bylaw is to allow these types of structures. For the longest time, they did allow dryland boathouses adjacent to shoreline, and somewhere in the zoning process, they changed the clause that would require it to be pushed up in behind the house, which would defeat the whole purpose of that. In my professional opinion, the application meets the 4 tests of the minor variance, and we would respectfully ask committee to support staff recommendation, and thank you. Glad to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. If the applicant is online, please raise your hand and we'll hear you.
I do see one hand raised,
All
Chair
right.
Stone. I'll now bring them into the meeting. A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can now, yes. Hello there.
Hello. Thanks, everybody. I have nothing to add. John and I think Madeline have summed up the application wonderfully, and we just thank everybody for your consideration, and that's all I have to say.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks for being here. All right. Members of the public, either present or electronically, that would like to speak to this application, please let us know.
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
All right then. Members of committee, any comments or questions? Seeing none. Moved by Helena Renwick, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A46-2022 HDE be approved. The purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 3.1.18.10 and 5.9.3 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to recognize the existing 7.9 square meter dry land boathouse located closer to the shoreline than the principal dwelling on a lot, and permit an existing 71 square meter boardwalk, pathway, and 30 square meter wood deck only within a natural resource zone. Conditional on the owner removing the 2.9 square meter frame shed to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right, Madeline, 32 Silver Sands Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 32 Silver Sands Road. The lot is designated waterfront in Huntsville's official plan and zoned Shoreline Residential 4 with exception 931 and Natural Resource Floodway under Huntsville zoning bylaw. The subject lands are contained within the waterfront residential 120 meters and floodway zone precincts in the community planning permit bylaw. An application has been submitted to permit the construction of a utility shed on the lot. A minor variance is required to permit a 20-meter squared utility shed to be located below the regulatory flood elevation. Site-specific zoning on the property states that the minimum elevation for openings to buildings and structures shall be above 290 meters above sea level, and the minimum elevation for the driveway shall be 289.16 meters above sea level, with a minimum setback from the watercourse of 30 meters. The Shoreline Residential 4 zone permits the development of single detached dwellings and accessory structures. The single detached dwelling has been built on a portion of the property zoned Shoreline Residential 4. The proposed utility shed is located within the Shoreline Residential 4 zoned portion of the property in close proximity to the dwelling. However, the elevation of the proposed utility shed is unknown. A Class 3 permit approval would be required to authorize a variation from the requirements of this proposal. Having regard to the provisions of the community planning permit bylaw, staff would recommend that council deny the proposed variation in this instance if the CPP bylaw was in effect. Looking at the official plan, the subject lands are included in the waterfront designation. In this instance, the proposal will result in minimal visual impacts from the river, as it will be hidden by existing vegetation and elevation changes. The utility shed reflects the size and scale of the lot. An existing dwelling, however, is not keeping with the character of the area. Natural constraint mapping identifies flood-prone lands and the Muskoka Heritage Area. Where the two-zone concept is applied, the floodway is the continuous inner portion of the floodplain, representing that area required for the safe passage of flood flow, and that area where flood depths and velocities are considered to be such that they pose a potential threat to life and property damage. The subject property is entirely within the floodway, which restricts development and site alteration. In this instance, a geodetic survey has not been submitted to determine the elevation of the land in the location where the utility shed is to be constructed. It should be noted that the 2020 provincial policy statement contains policies and provisions restricting development adjacent to sensitive hydrological features. However, some minor development and site alteration may be allowed in hazardous lands where the effects and risks to public safety are minor, could be mitigated in accordance with provincial standards, and where specific tests can be met. If committee were to see the application favorably, staff recommend the conditions outlined in the report to be included. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. Comments were received from the CN Railway as the property is in close proximity to the rail line. However, the comments from CN circulated to committee were clarified as they were provided on the basis that the application was not for an accessory structure. Due to the nature of the proposal, CN has no comments or concerns. It should be noted that if committee views the application favorably, staff recommend that the condition outlined in the report to address CN's comments will not be included. One letter of support was received by a neighboring property owner and circulated to committee before the meeting. The application would not appear to conform to the intent of the official plan, nor be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application does not appear to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending denial. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to speak to this. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Rob Ward. I'm the owner of the property. Do I sign this?
You're the owner. You can just sit there and
Okay.
get started.
Thank you. All right, so unlike all of the other applications here, I'm up against it, and I recognize that. However, I want to plead my cases as best I can. Madeline, could you bring up that the pink map again? So this whole area, as Madeline's quite rightly said, is very low. And unfortunately, the main bone of contention is that we're about a half a meter below the 190 meter level. That said, the house having been built before that particular bylaw was in effect, I think that's why it was an exception in the first place. If not, it is an exception. Now, as a homeowner, the first thing I think of when I look is I say, well, the garage is at exactly the same height as the house. I think you've seen the house there. So there's nothing that I can do except build a berm or something like that to raise the garage to comply with the four criteria. Now, that's doable, but I'd really rather not, since if the house floods and the garage doesn't flood, it doesn't matter much to me. I'm just going to take you through the pink diagram. At the bottom, you'll see a bunch of smaller structures. Those are the caravan park structures. And although Madeline and I did not discuss those structures, council may be aware that those have been flooded several times since 2012. It's a very low area. They subsist and they survive, and they put it all back together. And I just want to point out that nothing was carried away during this flooding. The flooding is pretty static. In other words, it comes up and it goes down. There's no current going through that area. Nobody's trailers were removed. In respect of the flooding of my house, I think the 2012 floods resulted in the basement flooding. And I think as a result of that, there may be records with council, Madeline may know better than me, that required that the basement become unfinished. It was finished. The basement then became unfinished. And therefore, I can't store any utensils or anything that's likely to rust down there. That's a problem for me, because that means that I've really got nowhere else to store lawnmowers, snow blowers, anything that I would like to use to start to use this land, which I love. I'm looking with my nephew at a possible beekeeping operation, so I'd probably want a quad or something like that. So really, there's nothing there but the house, and that makes it very, very awkward to have any kind of even maintenance. And I think there's an importance here to do with maintenance. The lack of shelter for implements and the fact that the basement must remain unfinished means that the owner of this property basically can only come and go. There's no, there's no development really here. If you look at, I'm asking the council to look at the shed as more an adjunct to maintenance rather than a development in, not technically, but at least conceptually. There's no floor anticipated for this shed, although the structure, and you've seen, I think, the engineering drawings that came with it, although the structure itself is going to be sound and is going to be affixed to the ground with cement posts, courtesy of a normal building operation. The shed itself, I'm anticipating leaving a small space at the bottom. So if there's flooding, the water goes under, it raises, and then goes back down. And because the time for flooding is usually that first few weeks in May when the river gets up. That happens. We've had flooding there once while I've been here. I've been here 3 years. The basement itself had a few puddles on the floor. That was the extent of the flooding. They were like an inch deep. So I guess what I'm asking the council to consider is, since this whole house, this whole property is an exception, if the council would consider making an exception despite the fact that it does not comply with the four standards, simply to allow the homeowner, me, to be able to maintain my property, to have implements. Yes, I'm asking for room to store the car. The issue came up, and Madeline pointed it out to me, that in fact this shed was larger than the minimum that was there, but I was quite happy to reduce that to the 20 meter squared maximum that would be allowed. That would still allow me to get a car in there in case I need to leave it. That's something else. I work overseas. I'm a lawyer. I work in New Zealand for several months of the year. And so my nephew is there at the moment, and I'll get back to him in a sec. But while I'm away, if my nephew is not there, I'm sort of worried about security. And before I made this application, I did consider those nice, I think they're canvas or the soft roof things that a lot of owners have. But without some form of lockup, I feel uncomfortable leaving things there. So that's another problem that I have. Now, Madeline's talked to the issue of the bunkie, or no, you didn't. There's a bunkie and container on site, and I listened with interest to the issue of the container from the last time. Those are actually going with my nephew to start a business down in Nova Scotia in the spring. That's anticipated. He wants to start a mini brewery down there, and the container is full of gear for him to do that. The bunkie is so he can live down there while he's setting up shop. So I'm certainly, I have no qualms with removing them, but I'd ask for the council to give me some time and check on me next year. So there's that. In terms of fence along the railway, I noticed in the plan, there is already a mesh fence along that, along the railway boundary. If the council was to force me as sort of part of a compromise to put in a chain link fence there, I only point out that this is mature stands of maple and very mature stands of maple and birch. You're probably all aware that birch come down quite regularly. The fence has probably, since I've moved there and cleared it once, there's been 4 more trees come down on top of it. So I'd much rather, if the council was prepared to do so, continue with the mesh fence, because I can just take the trees off. A chain link fence is going to get seriously damaged if a tree comes down on it.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Members of the public that have any questions about this application?
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
All right. Committee members, comments or questions? Mr. Donald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Question through you to Madeline. On the floodplain map for the Big East River that was illustrated there, in the legend that I have on the attachments that you sent through, It says floodway and then floodline. Could you help me understand the difference between those two elements?
For sure, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So flood line, or we would consider it also flood fringe, you could see that as sort of diagonal lines in orange, light orange, and floodway is essentially the pinkish red portion that's just overlaid.
So is the flood line the railroad?
Pardon me?
Is the flood line the railroad? Is that part of CN, as identified on the map?
That would be where the CN tracks are, yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And a second question. So to the applicant's point, I always struggle with anything happening in the Big East.
But we are talking about half a meter below the permitted elevation. Is that correct? Where the shed is going to be, if that ground was half a meter higher, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Is that correct?
So we would hope we wouldn't be. Unfortunately, though, we don't actually know the elevation that ground is sitting at.
So to you, sir, you made the comment or the statement that the ground is half a meter below the elevation. So how do you know that, or is that your impression?
Both Madeline and I were going on existing estimates of the elevation based on the contour lines. There is, I think, down by the railway tracks, someone has put in an exact figure, which was 190. Do you remember that down by the railway tracks? There was one measurement.
So I can comment on the district's mapping.
Yeah.
They've allocated a point down by the railway tracks and essentially the driveway into this property as the elevation being at 289.1 meters.
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Now,
And sorry, the requirement is 290?
290, yeah.
Thank you.
Now, if I can speak to that it was underwater 2 springs ago, and my house was about 1.5 meters above the water level at that stage. If this was going to depend on getting a geodetic survey, I'm kind of hoist, because with the sea level rising anyway, I'm not sure I'm going to be ahead. But I would, if council intended not to give this, but would adjourn me to try and get it up a half meter, that's fine. In answer to your question, I would also be prepared to put a berm if there was doubt, but I wouldn't want the berm to be more than a half meter.
Okay. Mr. Donald?
Sorry, at the risk of hogging the discussion.
That's all right.
In previous applications that we've had in flood zone or flood-prone areas, I believe that we have put in requirement that the structure be flood-resistant or words to that effect. Has that been considered or been discussed with the applicant?
That's, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
That has been considered, and that if you did see it favorably, that would definitely be a condition of the variance.
Okay, and sorry, one final question.
Go ahead.
The cost of a geodetic survey, how much roughly would that be, and what's involved?
So I don't know exact cost for that, unfortunately, but essentially that would just determine the elevation of where the water would be rising to and where that ground is actually located currently. So we'd kind of have some sort of idea, a better understanding, essentially. But I can maybe let Richard speak to that.
Yep, you're on. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Exact cost, not exactly aware. It would be likely around 5,000, I would assume. Time would be an issue. Surveyors are very busy right now. And as Madeline points out, the purpose of the geodetic survey would be to establish spot elevations across the property so that you could pinpoint, knowing what the flood elevation is, and subtracting the spot elevation, how much flood depth would actually be experienced in the location. So that would be the purpose. And the only other thing just to point out is the Big East River was mapped in 1989. So some of the floodplain elevations that we currently use are from that mapping source. And I believe there were elevations, spot elevations on this property in that mapping. And they were in the order of what's being described here. So we do have some information from that mapping.
Okay. Helena Renwick?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. And it's more of a comment, and to say that I am sympathetic with Mr. Orr's proposal and the fact that this utility shed is not, should it flood, there's not going to be any damage to life or any loss of life if something should happen to it. It is close to the house. I recognize that we're not sure exactly how much lower or higher the house is, or the utility shed would be. But I'm sympathetic to the fact that he needs a place to store his equipment and to put things. So I'm aware of that, and I take that into consideration with this application. So it's, again, more of a comment than anything.
Councillor Fitzgerald?
Thank you, Chair Stone. I guess in light of the fact that we're not adding a septic in this proposal and there's no inhabited space, I would tend to be inclined to support the applicant in his efforts to secure this structure. So,
Is that a form of a motion?
yes.
All right. Before I move to you, do we have a seconder for that motion? It would appear. All right. Mr. Donald?
May I comment?
Yes, go
I
ahead.
support Helena's comment and Councillor Fitzgerald's comment that we're not adding to the risk of life and limb because this is a utility structure. Again, I recognize staff's commitment to interpreting the legislation as it is written, and I take our responsibility to apply some additional consideration to the applicant's requests in light of the constraints of that legislation. And I think it makes sense that given that there is a marginal exposure within the legislation and there's no additional threat to life and limb or the environment as it appears, I would support the resolution amendment. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Procedurally, do I have to read the original?
Through you, Chair Stone, yes, you would have to read the original, and we would move to an amendment followed by a main motion as amended, if you're approving.
All right, here we go. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Kenneth Donald, I think. Be it resolved that minor variance application A47-2022 HTE be denied, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsection 3.6.2, the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P, in order to permit a 20 square meter utility shed to be located below the regulatory flood elevation. And now I am waiting for the amended motion. All right, that's the same as what I have in the package? No? Okay. All right. So moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Kenneth Donald, be it resolved that the following word, denied, be hereby deleted and replaced with approved, and that the following lines be hereby added. Conditional on no habitable space being permitted within the utility shed, the owner removing the private cabin and shipping container on the lot, and the utility shed being flood-proofed in accordance with the Ontario Building Code, all to be implemented through site plan control or the community planning permit to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville. Are there any comments or questions about the amendment? All in favor of the amendment? And that's carried.
Thank you, councillors.
All right. So now we have to pass the motion as amended. All these hoops. I don't have to reread it, apparently. All in favor of the motion as amended? Shazam. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And Madeline, you've been working hard this month. 27 West Street North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 27 West Street North. The lot is designated residential within the Huntsville settlement area in Huntsville's official plan and zoned residential 1 under Huntsville's zoning bylaw. The subject lands are contained within the urban residential low precinct in the community planning permit. The application is to permit the reconstruction and expansion of a portion of the dwelling. On June 15th, 2022, a minor variance was approved for the subject property, file number A23-2022, which recognized an existing 1.2 meter setback from the northerly interior lot line and permitted a reduction from 1.5 meters to 1.2 meters in the northerly interior side yard setback for an addition to a single-family dwelling. Due to a survey error, the relief required for the reconstruction of the dwelling is a reduction to the northerly side yard from 1.5 meters to 0.8 meters. A minor variance is required to recognize the location of the existing dwelling within 0.8 meters of the northerly interior side lot line and permit a reduction in the northerly interior side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 0.8 meters for a 4.5 meter high, 43 meter square addition to a single detached dwelling. The minor variance will be conditional on maintaining a treed vegetative buffer along the northerly interior side yard. Based on the configuration of the property, the proposed reconstruction and expansion is located in the most suitable location. The proposal complies with lot coverage and maintains the existing non-complying yard requirements along both side yards and the front yard. The increase in height for the reconstruction and expansion is also below the maximum permitted height for an R1 zone property. The reconstruction and expansion proposal will not likely result in any significant new impacts to abutting landowners. Additionally, maintaining a vegetative buffer along the northerly side yard adjacent to the proposed structure has been added as a condition to provide screening. Class 3 permit approval would be required to authorize a variation from the minimum required side yard setback for this proposal. Having regard to the provisions of the CPP bylaw, staff would recommend that council approve the proposed variation to the urban residential low precinct lot requirements in this instance if CPP was in effect. Looking at the official plan, the residential designation within the urban center encourages intensification through the built-up area by requiring development to be in a compact form. In this instance, the proposal is in keeping with the current use of the property as is intended to improve the function of the dwelling while maintaining the character of the surrounding area. The existing deck and a portion of the existing dwelling are to be removed. The proposed 0.8 meter northerly interior side yard encroachment is not changing with this proposal, but is being recognized as the height in the area is increasing. Additionally, the design of the reconstruction and expansion is in keeping with the character of the existing structure and surrounding built form. Oh, I'm so sorry. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests for a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and therefore staff are recommending approval. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or representative to make any comments. Perhaps online? Raise your hand electronically.
Chair Stone, I see no hands raised.
All right. Members of the public that wish to speak to this application?
I see no hands raised, Chair Stone.
Seeing none. Committee members, comments or questions? All right. Moved by Helena Renwick, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A49 2022 HTE be approved. The purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsections 3.13.2 and 5.2.4 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to recognize the location of the existing dwelling within 0.8 meters of the northerly interior side lot line and permit a reduction in the northerly interior side yard setback from 1.5 meters to 0.8 meters for a 4.5 meter high, 43 square meter addition to a single family dwelling, conditional on maintaining a treed vegetative buffer along the northerly interior side yard. Comments or questions? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. Thank you, Madeline, for all that work. And Kelsey's coming to talk about 8 Turnbull Lane.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Through you, Mr. Chair, the subject property is located at 8 Turnbull Lane. Oops. The lot is designated waterfront and is zoned Shoreline Residential 3. The subject lands are also contained within the Recreational Resort Residential in the CPP bylaw, which applies to residential properties within the Hidden Valley Resort Residential area. As discussed in previous presentations, the Community Planning Permit bylaw was passed in July by Council. However, it's not yet in force and effect. However, the future precinct is important to note. The application has been submitted to permit a 174.5 square meter single detached dwelling and a 60 square meter detached garage, and a private cabin located in the second story of the garage. So here's the dwelling and the detached garage, and the private cabin will be on the second floor. A minor variance is required to permit a private cabin on the property with an area of less than 4,000 square meters, which is an acre, and to increase the primary lot coverage from 5% to 6.9%. Flood-prone lands are identified on the property. The official plan states that new development and site alteration except for minor expansions to existing legal non-conforming uses, flood and erosion control measure structures, and marine-related structures such as docks, decks, and non-habitable boathouses are not permitted below the regulatory flood elevation. Staff requested a geodetic survey to establish the accurate flood elevations on the property, which we did receive. The survey showed that the majority of the lands are below the regulatory flood elevation for Peninsula Lake. Therefore, the proposed dwelling and detached garage with the private cabin would be developed within the floodplain. It is noted that the applicant has a design where doors, windows, and other openings in the habitable buildings and structures are to be above the minimum regulatory flood elevation. However, the official plan does not permit new development within the floodplain to prevent loss of life and property damage. The proposal would also not be considered a minor addition to the legal non-conforming uses, as the proposed dwelling is over triple the size of the existing dwelling. Based on this analysis of the town's flood hazard policies, the development would not be in keeping with the intent of the official plan. Also, given the application does not conform to the official plan, the proposal would be considered under a Class 3 permit under the Community Planning Permit, and approval would not be recommended by staff. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act and to the Peninsula Lake Association. 4 letters of support were received and circulated to the committee prior to the meeting. To conclude, the application does not conform with the intent of the official plan and is not consistent with the provincial policy statement, as new development is within the floodplain and it is not a minor addition. Therefore, the application does not satisfy the 4 tests of a minor variance as set out in the Planning Act, and staff are recommending denial. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll call on the applicant or the representative to make any comments about this. Come on down.
Chair Stone, I do see one hand raised online as well.
All right, is that, that's your planner? Let's hear from the planner first, if you don't mind.
I'll now bring them into the meeting.
Okay.
A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of committee. It's Marie Poirier from Marie Poirier Planning and Associates, 44A King William Street in Huntsville, P1L2C5. And I'd like to thank you for allowing me to speak this morning on behalf of my client, the Ouellets. As staff have noted, this is an application for a minor variance to permit a primary lot coverage of 6.9% for a dwelling where 5% is permitted, and permit a private cabin on a lot with less than 4,000 square meters of area. It is important to note that the private cabin is to be integrated into the proposed garage, and the garage is proposed to encompass a lot coverage of 3.1%, such that the total lot coverage of this property would still be 10%. The capping of the 3.1% lot coverage for accessory structures was submitted as part of the application. And if committee does approve this application, we would request that it be made a condition. On the matter of lot coverage, this is, in my opinion, a redistribution of the permitted total 10% lot coverage for primary and accessory structures. Capping the accessory lot coverage at 3.1% will offset the primary lot coverage increase to 6.9% and further ensure that the size of the private cabin is proportionately scaled to the size of a lot, which would allow a private cabin at 5%. On May 12th, staff advised me that development that does not exceed 5% primary lot coverage and 5% accessory structure coverage, along with floodproofing, would be allowed as of right. This application then merely redistributes the coverage ratio. In my opinion, so long as the accessory lot coverage is capped at 3.1%, an increase in primary lot coverage to 6.9% will result in the same development situation as 5% and 5%. Furthermore, the buildings have been designed by Dan Duke, a professional engineer, to be flood-proofed, and a report from Mr. Duke was submitted with the application. And Mr. Duke is with us this morning as well, virtually, I believe, and will speak to that aspect of the application shortly. In applying the 4 tests for a minor variance as a professional planner, I'd like to point out the following. The tests regarding maintaining the intent of the official plan and zoning bylaw are just that. The application must maintain the, quote, general intent. It does not have to strictly conform. It is important to note that pursuant to section 24 sub 2.1, a zoning bylaw is deemed to conform to an official plan on the date it was passed. Therefore, the tests respecting intent, the application satisfies those tests and extend to that of conformity. In my opinion, the variances are minor. There will be no more impact from a 6.931 split than a 5% split on lot coverage, which staff have agreed would be permitted as of right. And the application is desirable for the development of the lands. I'd like to further note, and it is important to note, that the lot is zoned for residential development. It is not zoned natural resource or any other zone that would prohibit development. And this is not new development. This is existing development. The lot already has a dwelling on it, as do all the adjoining lots. The private cabin, as I noted, will be located within the garage and therefore itself will have no footprint. The development as proposed is in character with the lots on Turnbull Lane and will actually be set back further than the dwelling on the adjacent lot, including the dwelling on Lot 4, which was built as recently as 2019. I would like to wrap up by saying that, again, in my opinion, the application does represent good planning. It meets the 4 tests of a minor variance. It's not new development, and it's being flood-proofed. And I'd like to now ask Dan Duke to come on and speak to the matter of the flood-proofing, please, Mr. Chair.
Chair Stone, I do see another hand raised. Would you like me to bring them into the meeting?
All right, go ahead and bring Mr. Duke in. Hopefully he'll be quickly. He'll speak quickly. Mr. Duke, hello.
Yes, good morning. Dan Duke from Duke Engineering, 48 King William Street, Unit 4, Huntsville, Ontario. Good morning, members of the committee and chair. So we prepared a plan just to show the proposed building. And we've done many of these in the past where we designed basically, we keep the subfloor at the 100-year flood elevation and put it on a crawl space. And it's designed to flood. So we flood proof it by allowing just the crawl space to flood. Keep anything that would be, in that crawl space, anything that would get wet or would rot or have any problems, that would all be designed to be either pressure treated or something. So we wouldn't wind up with all this mold issue and stuff. Now we've done several. There's another cottage, I think, or house just down the road that Mr. Ouellette actually built a few years ago, where it was also flood-proofed in the same manner. So basically, that's how we take care of it. We would want to bring a little bit of fill in to provide frost protection for the foundation, but other than that, this isn't unusual for us to propose this type of construction in areas where the land level is low, but we're trying to keep the building above the 100-year flood elevation.
Perfect.
Yeah. So if there's any
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, and the applicant?
Thank you very much. My name is René Ouellette. I'm the applicant.
Oh, can you put your microphone on, please? There we go.
Is it on? Yes. Okay. I like to say my piece, but I'll read it so I don't get tangled up with all that.
Perfect.
We've been trying for over 1 year to get the support of the planning department before bringing this proposal to the minor variance committee. It was looking if we were willing to do certain changes on the main dwelling, like having smaller deck or no deck at all, no covered porch, detach the garage, that we may get support. The last email we got said, it is not the official plan and zoning bylaw of the town of Huntsville, and staff are unable to support the application. As you know, and Marie explained it, by right, we are allowed to build 5% of lot coverage for the main dwelling and 5% of lot coverage for accessory building, which allow me to build 2 accessory buildings of 645 square feet each. That is a pretty big structure. And I'm allowed to build 2 of them. And the main house only 1,698 square feet, including deck and porches. We are asking to increase the lot coverage for the main house and decrease the lot coverage for the accessory building. We are not asking for an increase in lot coverage at all. 10% of lot coverage is 10% of lot coverage, no matter how you're going to cut the pie. the right thing to do would be to allow 10% for the main dwelling and not have the two big accessory building that would create a bigger driveway and more loss of green space. And by having 3 building, it would look out of place and will not conform with my neighbor houses that all have 10% or more of lot coverage and no accessory building. The Minor Variance Committee has a chance to do the right thing and allow the 10% of lot coverage in a far better way for this particular lot. Please, I am asking you to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Willett.
If you have any question, I'd be willing to answer it.
Perfect. All right, first we need to go to the public and ask if any members of the public would like to speak to this application. I would. Come on down. There we go.
Oh, thank you. I am Renee's wife, a co-owner of the property. And I have a small point. No one has mentioned that all our neighbors are in support of this. They've all sent letters that it didn't come up, but there's only 6 lots on the entire street that are in the floodplain. And every lot has been rebuilt on except for ours and our next door neighbors who are here. And they all have over 10% coverage. It's not like there's any more lots to build on. It's not a great big subdivision, and if you allow this, then they're gonna have to allow 200 other houses. There's only 6 properties, and there's 2 left. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We got more coming down.
Can't turn it up.
All right.
Yes, Ron Bodrug, 6 Turnbull Lane, right next door to the Willettes. I'm totally supportive of the minor variance, and I was hoping that there would even be greater flexibility by the committee today to potentially bring the garage and the home into one structure rather than 2. I think visually from our place, having 2 structures and a shed and so forth, in my opinion, it would be visually much improved if there was just one home with a garage rather than a shed, a garage, accommodations above the garage, and then the home. So I'd like to ask the committee to see if there's some flexibility to consider that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Any other members of the public that wish to speak to this?
I see no hands raised online, Chair Stone.
None electronically. Okay, members of the committee, I see Councillor Fitzgerald's light on.
Oh, that's from
Oh,
previous.
it's from previously.
I
All
do
right.
have something to say. I guess I'm going first?
You're going first.
Thank you, Chair Stone. It seems to me that we have a situation here where there is a certain amount of development allowed, and is that development that's allowed the best possible development for the applicant and for the neighbors in the community? And after hearing Marie speak and the neighbors speak, I think that sometimes our numbers can be a little restrictive in what is allowed and what we will allow. And I think the best possible scenario for development for the applicant and the neighbors does seem pretty minor in nature, in my opinion. I agree with their consultant. And I don't know how we move forward because there's been some other proposals laid on the table, and I don't know if the applicant is privy to those previously or is amenable to those suggestions, but I think we need to have a greater discussion about this.
Thanks very much. Kenneth Donald.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and through you, perhaps to Kelsey, but it may be maybe to the applicant. I see on the proposed plan or sketch for planning purposes, the future house also has a future attached garage, which there's going to be a carport and detached garage. So if that whole development goes ahead, are we going to have a carport and detached garage and a future garage attached to the house, plus the existing cottage?
I'll let Kelsey speak to that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if it's the correct sketch then that was provided. And if so, I'll be happy to share the...
Go ahead.
Yeah. It'll just take me a few moments. So I now just have it on my screen, apologies. There's been a couple of iterations, so I'll just zoom out so you could get a better...
Can you scroll? Okay, yep.
So as the proposal sits right now, there is a detached garage, which is 60 square meters, and the proposed dwelling, which is 174.5 square meters, and then a utility shed.
So that's not what's in our package.
Oh, apologies.
All right, so what's on the screen here is what is proposed. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And if I can be clear, so the existing cottage would be demolished?
Yes, that is correct.
And if I might, is habitable space allowed above the garage?
That's a part of the relief, would be permitting a private cabin above in the second story on a lot under 4,000 square meters.
All right, thank you. Mr. Donald.
Is it appropriate to ask the applicant a question at this point?
Sure, if the applicant can come down. All right, Mr. Donald, your question?
I apologize, Mr. Ouellette. The document that we had in our package differs from the one that's presented on the screen at the moment. To your neighbour's comment, and for your consideration, the detached garage, was it detached because of trying to meet the planning requirement, or was it something that you desired?
No, the detached garage was...
Can you put your microphone on, please? Okay.
My proposal was to have the garage attached to the house, but because of the planning department, it resulted into detaching the garage.
All right, that doesn't...
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Kelsey, can you speak to that, please?
Yes, sorry. So we have talked about this application for the past year. So there were many different iterations, and I think they were trying to achieve meeting the 5% and 5%. So that's why detaching the garage was suggested. And then in this iteration, they went with that plan. So it wasn't, we didn't tell them, but we said maybe if you were to try to meet the provisions, that might be an option. But this proposal still doesn't meet the primary lot coverage of 5%.
All right, so just to be clear, if our committee chooses to extend the primary lot coverage, we could then put the garage attached to the dwelling. Is that correct?
Yes, so we would just have to revise the relief. So I just have to do a quick calculation and get confirmation from the owner about what that calculation would be to change the relief to have an attached garage, if that's what you wish to do.
All right, thank you. I'll ask Mr. Clark to speak.
So just to add to what Kelsey's already said, the other thing we might want to check with is the engineer, just because the garage would have doors at grade level. So it would be a potential point for water to enter the building. So I would imagine there would be a flood-proofing question. They might be able to easily address it, or it might be complex. So I would just throw that on the table if we could get Mr.
We have
Duke.
Mr. Duke here with us. If Mr. Duke could come back, if he's still attached electronically.
I'm working on bringing him in.
Mr. Duke, would attaching the garage be problematic for flooding?
No, not at all. The garage wouldn't be habitable space, so it would be set more at obviously the level of the lot level, and the house would be above we would still keep the floor level at the 100-year flood elevation, but same as we'd allow the crawl space to flood, we just allow the garage to flood. There would be no habitable space or any plumbing or anything related in the garage, anything electrical that would be an issue if the water came up. One other point I should have added maybe previously is we did also look at, there's the static flood level and there's also the wave run up. Now the Olets have lived there, I think, both through the 2013 and 2019 flood, and they indicated that their house didn't flood either time, and they're actually below the I think they're maybe below the 100-year flood level. Unfortunately, when we looked at it, the fetch of the lake was such that we couldn't really reduce the wave run up, but we do know that the floods that occurred in 2013 and 2019 didn't come up with that 100-year flood elevation because it also has over a meter of wave run up that didn't occur. And they also face sort of, well, they're on the west side, so they don't get the prevailing westerly winds, although we can't take that into account when we do our wave run up. So even though we're pretty sure they probably won't see the waves, we're just the way we calculate wave run up doesn't allow us to include that. So So to get back to the question about the garage, no, I don't have any engineering related issues with flooding of the garage at all.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Okay.
Kenneth Donald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. So if I may comment, it seems that we've moved down a path of a piecemeal. I'm sorry, let me begin. I recognize and respect, town staff's requirement and intent to work within the legislation. But again, I'll take the committee's position of adding additional commentary. That it seems we've gone down a path of piecemealing the application to meet an administrative or legislative requirement, interpret it as you will, and not satisfying anybody. We're not satisfying the town, we're not satisfying the applicant. And to Councillor Fitzgerald's earlier comment, it does appear to me that this is a minor increase in lot coverage. So I'm not sure how to propose this, because what's presented to us is not what the client wants. So do we just amend this to increase the overall coverage? Because we don't actually have a sketch or proposed plan in front of us. How would we deal with this if we were to amend it?
Let me pose that to Kelsey or Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. If they were to want to proceed with the garage being attached with the exact same dimensions, We could calculate it if that's what the applicant wishes. We would just need 5 minutes just to confirm the areas. But if they would want any other dimensions or proposal, I don't know how quickly we would be able to bring that to the table. Yeah.
All right.
Chair Stone, if I may interrupt, sorry. We do have a hand raised from the planner again. I don't know if you want to have her speak. I don't know if it's something to do with this or.
Not at this point,
Okay,
all right, but we know she's there for our help.
perfect, thank you.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Yeah, I think that after conversation that if that's what the applicant would really prefer, and it seems like aesthetically, when I'm looking at the overhead maps, that it's very similar in development to the abutting properties. It seems like we're tripping over numbers here in our policies, which I agreed the planning department is doing their job, and they're doing it very efficiently and effectively. But does it make the most sense? So I'm glad this committee exists for these reasons, and I'm happy to support a 5 or 10-minute break to get it resolved so we don't have to put this matter.
All right, fair enough. So one last question to the applicant. Are you happy with the size of the garage if it were attached to the dwelling all in one?
Yes, I would be happy, and it would not be more than 10% lot coverage. All the calculation will make it fit.
Correct. We're just making sure there's no other variations. We've got the same amount of lot coverage. We'll just make sure that the garage could be attached. Kelsey, do you need a few minutes to do something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It'd be great to have just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, just to confirm with the applicant that it's the appropriate numbers, so they're not having to, we're getting everything correct, so they don't have to come back again.
Perfect.
Yes, thank you.
All right, we're going to take an 8-minute break, and we'll be back here at 11:05. All right, we're up. Okay, so the original motion was moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Helena Renwick. Be it resolved that the Committee of Adjustment deny minor variance application A 20-2021 HTE, the purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsection 3.1.17 and 5.3.4 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P. In order to permit a private cabin on the property with an area of less than 4,000 square meters and increase the primary lot coverage from 5% to 6.9%. So, we need a mover and seconder for an amendment. All right, Helena Renwick and Kenneth Donald will second that. And the amendment will read, all right, the amendment will read, be it resolved that the following word, deny, be hereby deleted and replaced with approve, and that the following number be hereby deleted, 6.9%, and replaced with 8.9%. The following lines be hereby added. Conditional on accessory lot be reduced from 5% to 1.2%, and the owner revegetating the shoreline buffer to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville to be implemented through site plan control or community planning permit. Now, before we move on, I will ask the planner, Marie Poirier, if she could come back and confirm that that lot coverage percentage is correct.
Thank you very much for that opportunity, Mr. Chair, because I do have some concerns with that. I don't know how we got to 8.9, why it just wouldn't be 10, because we're looking at a 60 square meter garage, which was 3.1% in the original application, and then 6.9% for the dwelling in the original application. You put the two of them together, you still get 10.
All right, 1 second. I'm going to ask Kelsey to speak to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Marie, for the question. So we calculated the garage, the single detached dwelling, as well as the attached screened-in porch and covered decks as a part of the primary lot coverage. And then accessory lot coverage, we also had to have consideration of the dock and the shed. So that's what our calculations are based on. Yes.
Perfect.
So I don't know if you had any changes or wanted to review those calculations, but that's what we...
No, I understand now, because I was going to bring up the issue of the dock, and that we still needed some accessory coverage for that. So I see what you've done. That's wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right. So with that, I'm going to ask committee, all in favor of the amendment? And that's carried. Now, all in favor of the main motion as amended? And that's carried. All right, a little bit of work to get there, but we did. All right, thanks for everybody's work. That's wonderful. All right, moving on, Kelsey's going to speak to 87 Stevenson Road 8.
Great, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Through you, the subject property is located at 87 Stevenson Road 8 East. The lot is designated rural and is zoned rural natural resource, rural 1, and rural special industrial with exception 0009. The subject lands are also contained within the community and rural business employment precinct and the flood precinct and the rural precinct contained in containing portions of flood zone overlay, as well as containing the previous M3009 exception within the community planning permit bylaw. As mentioned in previous presentations, this bylaw was approved in July, however, it's not yet in full force and effect. However, the precinct is still important for decisions, not for decisions, just for your context. The application The application has been submitted to permit a 580 square meter manufacturing plant with 2 silos. The requested variance would increase the maximum height from 11 to 15 meters for the proposed manufacturing plant and increase the maximum height from 11 meters to 18 meters and 20.5 meters for the 2 proposed silos on the manufacturing plant. So the site plan is quite detailed, so I thought I'd just highlight. There's the manufacturing plant, and then the 2 silos are just those 2 little squares there. That resource industries will only be permitted to and expand in a manner that mitigates negative impacts to the natural environment and land use conflicts within the surrounding land uses in accordance with the provincial requirements. A scoped environmental impact assessment was prepared by Riverstone to assess the proposed development and potential impacts to the stream and wetland on the property. The author of the report confirmed the stream is a warm water stream and discussed existing impacts to the stream from the budding operation. A remediation plan of a 20-meter buffer between the stream and development is recommended. And a condition has been added to ensure the remediation will be carried out and enforced through a site plan or community planning permit should the minor variance be approved. The proposed concrete batch plant is in an existing cleared area, 100 meters from Highway 11, making the existing plant visible from the highway. Existing native vegetation helps screen much of the development from view. The proposed new batch plant is equally visible purely out of necessity for the function of the plant, but will be clad in natural hues. The existing plant is also 22 meters, the silo. No additional trees will be removed from the site, and a 20-meter buffer from the watercourse will be revegetated as outlined in the Riverstone report. Therefore, there will be no further visual impacts. The application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. One letter of objection was provided regarding the road and was circulated prior to the meeting. The applicant has noted that production is not expected to increase. However, staff are still awaiting comments from operations. There were also questions regarding noise. With the proposed plant, the trucks will load indoors as opposed to now they're loading outdoors, which the applicant anticipates will reduce equipment sounds. The new plant will also required an acoustic study as a part of the MECC environmental compliance report for the plan, which is to be implemented. The application would appear to conform to the intent of the official plan and be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Additionally, the application appears to satisfy the 4 tests of a minor variance. Therefore, staff are recommending approval. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Can I call on the applicant or representative to make some comments? Good morning. Is it still morning? It is. Yes.
Good morning. My name's Lauren Spivak, 19 West Road, Huntsville. I'm the architectural designer for the client, Clyde McDuff of Muskoka Ready Mix. Sorry, or I could sit closer to it. So my firm was retained by Clyde McDuff to complete the architectural design and site plan for the replacement batch plant. The existing plant has been visible since the 1970s on the east side of Highway 11, just north of Stevenson Road 8. You can see the big M. I just want to reiterate that the client doesn't anticipate an increase in production or traffic to and from the facility. The replacement batch plant is long overdue and will bring with it improved acoustic performance, energy efficiency, and dust control. As Kelsey mentioned, it'll be fully enclosed with steel and block building, whereas the previous plant, all the loading and all that was done outside. As part of the site redevelopment, Muskoka Ready Mix will also be installing new, safer, dual-wall above-ground fuel tanks to replace the aging underground tanks. They'll also be upgrading the wash water handling system to accept leftover concrete from returning trucks, separate it, and recycle it for reuse, keeping it from entering the ecosystem. The owner will carry out an updated acoustic audit upon completion of the new plant and submit the findings of the report to the Ministry of Environment and implement any of the recommendations identified. This should address any of the concerns that Mr. Hogue had emailed last night. Drainage on site previously flowed unrestricted into the surrounding environment, but the new stormwater management report and construction mitigation plan prepared by Pinestone will see the stormwater and runoff directed to perimeter swales and then outlet pipes with oil and grit separators to control the quality of the runoff. The proposed lot coverage of only 1.8% is well below the 30% allowable coverage for this lot. And even the gravel development area, although extensive, covers only 25% of the lot area. The remainder of the lot will be left in a natural state or revegetated per the recommendations of the scoped environmental impact study to remediate and prevent future damage to the ecosystem. The batch plant employs 15 residents and has been supplying concrete for surrounding construction projects and infrastructure in Muskoka for over 40 years. The nearest building is over 100 meters from the watercourse, and the aesthetics of the proposed development are a vast improvement over the existing facility. The landscaping design will be improved, and the new facility will bring with it upgrades in cement and dust control, collection, waste concrete recycling, and improve acoustics and energy efficiency. So as detailed in the planning justification report, it's my opinion that the development is compatible with adjacent uses, meets the 4 tests of a minor variance, is supported by the Town of Huntsville official plan, District of Muskoka official plan, and the provincial policy statement, particularly the economic and job creation policies. So it's my recommendation that the Town of Huntsville Committee of Adjustment approve the minor variance, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll call on the public. Any members of the public that wish to speak to this application?
Chair Stone, I do see one hand raised online.
All right, let's have them
I'll
in.
now bring them into the meeting. A reminder to please have your microphone and video, if possible, turned on before you begin speaking, and to confirm your name and mailing address.
Right, there we go.
Yes, go ahead.
John Hogue, 279 Toms Bay Road North, Utterson, Ontario, P0B 1MO. And I'd like to start actually by saying I'm glad to see the changes that are happening to the ready mix site. They all seem to be changes that will reduce the environmental impact. Delighted to see that. As was noted, I had some questions earlier. I think they've most been answered. The one point I would like to stress is when the acoustic or noise study is done, I would recommend that particular notice be taken of the berm. It is my impression as a non-technical person that the berm may be reflecting noise back through the Toms Bay Valley. I suggest that the acoustic study look not just at noise towards the highway, but in other directions as well. And that's the only environmental concern I think that needs more inspection. Apart from that, I'll note that Stevenson Road 8 was not really designed for the kind of loads that Muskoka Ready Mix puts on it. I realize that there's a certain amount of who owns this between roads and planning, but I would suggest that both Stevenson Road 8, at least from the cement plant on, and Greer Road, their structure be reviewed and the town consider rebuilding, because they really are taking more of a load than they should be taking. And apart from that, for clarity, I have no objections. I just wanted these points noted.
Thank you for your comments.
Chair Stone, there is one additional hand raised.
All right, let's have them in as well.
I'll just take a moment to let them into the meeting.
Yes,
There you
hello,
are.
everybody.
Hello.
My name's Linda Kangas, 230 Edgemere Road East, Port Sydney. I'm on the board of the Mary Lake Association. And as John just commented in his earlier remarks, I'll start by saying I don't have any objections to this application. However, I do want to register a question, I guess. And that is, so first of all, the Lake Association is concerned about this construction simply because there is a stream there that drains into Mary Lake. So anything that happens on that site, you know, environmentally can affect the lake. So that's why we're keeping a close eye on this application. And I have no doubt, I have no doubt that the management of Ready Mix fully intends to comply with the environmental study that was done and the recommendations. However, in real life, in my experience, this is an expensive construction. Will be decisions made to, you know, contain costs and keep the project on schedule. And decisions can be made by frontline people, you know, in the heat of the moment who don't understand the environmental study and the agreements that were reached there. So my question is, what kind of inspections and how often will those be done to ensure compliance with the environmental study as the work proceeds, not at the end when you know, things may already have you know, frontline decisions have already been made. The guy driving the Bobcat has said, well, I don't know why they want it done this way. I have a cheaper and faster way to do it, so I'm going to do this. And then when the final inspection is done, we realize the environmental study hasn't been complied with. So that's my question.
All right, thanks very much. I'm going to ask Kelsey to speak to the, or Richard about the timelines for the studies that we're asking for.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. In terms of my knowledge, we don't typically do inspections following our approvals. I know building has inspection timelines, but I don't know if Richard has anything else to offer in terms
The
of...
applicant's representative mentioned the provincial requirements environmentally that you must do a report back. Is that correct?
Well, there's the Ministry of Environment approvals require that we follow all the recommendations of all of the studies that we have had done. I can't say I'm familiar with what kind of inspections would be required, but we do have to revegetate that area so that we're going to need to do a deposit, right, for our revegetation plan. And so in order to get that deposit back, we have to finish the work, so.
This would include noise as well for the province?
I think this concern is with respect to the environment, correct? The buffer around the stream. So that buffer, that vegetative buffer, the client will have to put a deposit down in order to secure that work is going to get done, and the work will have to get done in order to get that deposit back. So the acoustic study is separate. I believe that's a requirement of his business license and also the Ready Mix Association to have those acoustic studies done. So that will be a separate thing that will be addressed through the Ministry of Environment in a different department. Yeah.
Right, and we don't have...
I don't believe the town inspects those things. It's the Ministry of Environment that would ensure that those things are completed, yeah.
Okay. And Kelsey, you had a comment?
Apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I misspoke earlier. In terms of revegetation, we do a prior inspection after we've taken a security to ensure. So through Riverstone and through Pinestone, they provided a revegetation plan. And so we would take a security of the amount of what it would cost to do that revegetation. And if once the applicant follows through with that, we would do an inspection to ensure that it carried out, and then we would return that deposit.
Right. Thank you. All right. Any other member of the public that wishes to speak to this?
I see no hands raised, Chair Stone.
All right. Thank you. Committee members, comments or questions? I have a question. Kelsey, is there a requirement for some vegetative screening between the highway and this business?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Stone. We do have the requirement for the landscape buffers within our bylaw. Like it outlines the one abutting the street and the one abutting all the other lot lines, so that would be implemented. It is quite well screened at this moment from the road. But yes, they do need to include the landscape buffers in the site plan.
I would like to see that, yes. Any other comments or questions? All right. Moved by Helena Renwick, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that minor variance application A48-2022 HTE be approved. The purpose and effect of which is to provide relief from subsection 5.6.4 of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2008-66P in order to increase the maximum height from 11 meters to 15 meters for the proposed manufacturing plant and increase the maximum height from 11 meters to 18 meters for the first of two proposed silos on the manufacturing plant and from 11 meters to 20.5 meters for the second. Conditional on all the recommendations contained within scoped environmental impact study prepared by Riverstone Environmental Solution, Inc., dated August 2022, being implemented through site plan control or community planning permit. Final comments? All in favor? And that's carried. All right. What's our time? Okay. All right. Now that all comments have been received, I declare these public meetings respecting the above applications to be concluded. We will now move to the non-public portion of the meeting. If the applicant or their agent wishes to make comments regarding their application, they may do so after the staff presentation. And we're moving straight into 41 Florence Street West, and Kelsey's going to speak to that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, again. Through you, the subject property is located at 41 Florence Street West. The lot is designated urban residential and is zoned residential 1. The subject lands are also contained within the urban residential low precinct within the community planning permit bylaw, which applies to non-shoreline low density residential properties within the Huntsville settlement area. Although the bylaw is not yet in effect, it is important to note, and having regard for the provisions of the community planning permit bylaw, a community planning bylaw is not required to facilitate consent applications on lots that meet the minimum lot size requirements, although consent applications must meet the intent of the official plan. The applications have been submitted for the creation of two new residential lots. Severed Lot 1 would have approximately 1,537 square meters and 24 meters of frontage on Rice Lane. Severed Lot 2 would have an area of approximately 1,537 square meters and 48 meters of frontage on Rice Lane. The retained lands would have an area of approximately 6,232 square meters and 15 meters of frontage on Florence Street West. Initially, a concurrent rezoning amendment, had been submitted with the application, and applications were presented to Planning Committee on June 15th, 2022 for information only. At this time, there were outstanding concerns regarding unevaluated wetlands, road improvements, entrances, and access. The concurrent rezoning has since been withdrawn as it has been determined that both the proposed lots would conform with the R1 frontage requirements, given that they would be measured at the setback. Staff have requested a scoped environmental impact study to delineate the unevaluated wetland and provide appropriate setbacks for development, including the future development on the proposed lots and a road turnaround. A study has not been provided, and the applicant has decided to proceed with the application. Without accurate delineation of the wetland, staff were unable to determine if development would have negative impacts on the wetland and if there will be appropriate and adequate building areas on each of the proposed lots. Additionally, it has not been determined that a turning circle can be constructed to service the proposed lots without resulting in negative impacts. Staff cannot support the consent applications without the required study, as there is no information about the wetland and the potential adverse effects. So I have some photos here which show the southern proposed lot, and Rice Lane is where the car is there. The application has been circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act. District planning staff provided comments and did not oppose to the approval of the application. The operations department provided comments and noted with a new entrance there's no room for snow storage related to the municipal operations, as Rice Lane is only 10 meters in width. Following the planning committee, there was a meeting with operations on site to discuss the requirements in this regard and potential locations for the turnaround, snow storage, and entrances. The operations department noted that the proposed turnaround would also be in proximity to the unevaluated wetland, and a study would be needed to determine appropriate setback. The fire department and building department also commented that adequate turnaround facilities must be provided on Rice Lane to ensure emergency vehicle access. A letter of objection has also been provided in planning committee, which speaks to the capacity of the road and traffic concerns. As noted, operations would require road improvements in terms of a turnaround for the proposed lots and snow storage area. However, without a scoped environmental impact study, the design can't be determined for these aspects. Based on staff's review, the application would appear not to conform with the policies of the official plan, nor be consistent with the provincial policy statement. Therefore, staff are recommending the application be denied. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks very much. Call on the applicant or their representative if they wish to speak to this. It's not a public meeting.
No, did we close off?
Yeah, we did. I read the statement. Yeah.
I do have a handout, I guess.
If you could sit down, if you don't mind, you would be closer to the microphone and turn that on for us.
Yes, Robert Wolf, 41 Florence Street, Huntsville, Ontario, P1H1V4. I just asked Kelsey if she would distribute a couple of handouts that I couldn't get electronically.
All right, you can go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for hearing my application today. Secondly, I'd like to thank Kelsey Shedlock for answering all my questions and working on this application over the last 5 months. Now, if you can, actually, Kelsey, could you put that original sort of sketch of the previous one? No, that one. Okay, the goal of my application is to sever off 2 residential lots and retain 1 lot from my current property. The intention is to sell the lots as R1 residential properties and not to develop them myself. Each lot is significantly larger, approximately 0.4 of an acre each, than most other lots in the area and the town core. The lots are on town water, sewer, and transit, and therefore meet the town's goal to intensify development in the urban core. I'd like to just briefly go through a timeline of events. I started the process in mid-April by talking to the planning department to determine the process. On April 29th, we had the pre-consultation Zoom meeting, which there was Kelsey, myself.
Excuse me, I don't know why this timeline is important to us. We've got information before us right now, so,
Okay. Well, that's my presentation, is sort of take the committee through the steps and what has happened. Because originally I was told I needed to rezone, and then I didn't need to rezone. And I want to, address the two issues that I wasn't able to address during the meeting on the 15th. And they had to do with the environmental study and the snow turnaround. So that's sort of the angle that I've taken to.
so if I could just stop you there, so just for a moment. So Kelsey, there's a couple things that you're looking for in order to move forward, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So the planning department and operations had requested the study so we could more accurately determine where things need to be, and we're not comfortable moving forward without it. But yes, I believe Robert had some other points about why he thought he could proceed without those items. But yeah, I'm not sure what else we, like in terms of planning, we would like the studies to be provided and able to ensure that the lots can be developed and have the appropriate turnarounds.
Right, so what studies specifically?
So, sorry, I'm skipping over my words. So when I did the site visit, prior to the planning committee meeting, I found that there was some vegetation and aerial photos that were indicative to a wetland. And further south of the property, it was noted by other environmental impacts study that there was a wetland. So we wanted the delineation of the wetland to assure for planning that there was appropriate development envelopes. And then in terms of operations, they wanted to ensure that there was an appropriate turnaround location that would also not interfere with the wetland. So in terms, it's not currently on our mapping, so we don't have any idea of how far the setback should be and from what point and what the adequate buffer would be.
Sorry, I'm just asking questions as they come to mind. So the turnaround would be for fire?
So the turnaround is a typical development standard for operations to ensure that the plow can turn around and that there isn't a place for snow storage. Rice Lane is, as I mentioned in my verbal report, quite small in terms of its width. So there is a lot of constraints from an operations point of view. I can't comment on them with a lot of detail, but that was a concern for our operations department, and we had met and discussed what we would need from the town to move forward, and an environmental impact assessment was recommended from the point of when it went to planning committee and then on further site visits.
Okay. So we have that information now. Is there anything you'd wish to add?
Yes, I'd like to speak to the environmental study. Okay. And I'd also, there's some mention about road improvements. I know the snowplow issues. I know the snowplow turnaround is an issue I'd like to speak to, but my proposal isn't going to change the width or size of Rice Lane, so I'm not sure why that comment is in there. Regarding the wetland, I was advised by Kelsey to get an environmental study done. I contacted the 4 groups she recommended. 3 of them decided they wouldn't be able to do it in a timely fashion and declined to give me a quote. Riverstone Environmental Solutions did supply me with a quote. The initial cost would be $5,000. The timeline until the report would be a minimum of 6 months to over a year. During phone conversation and exchange of emails with Bev Wicks, a biologist at Riverstone, she provided the following information. The wetland in question has been evaluated 3 times in the last few years. Once on a property to the south, which I think is 206 which is quite a large one where the wetland actually exists and extends over to the town line. On the other two occasions, they were properties to the east, so I have no idea of who those properties were. The wetland does not contain any endangered species nor turtle populations, and a maximum buffer would be 30 meters if the wetland contained a fishery. The buffer would decrease to 20 meters, 10, or nothing, depending on the abundance of species or lack of in the wetland. In an email from Bev Wicks on June 27th, she states the setbacks to the wetland water course is dependent on the features and function of the wetland, and that we will determine during a site visit. I do not see any potential for endangered turtles, so the setback will be less than 30 meters. And I think she could provide the study simply because she's done that evaluation 3 times before. And if I could refer to the non-photographed or the handout, I'd just like to sort of point out, you know, the measurements, and one of the reasons why I don't think the ESI is required is using, you know, the town's mapping system, and I know it's not 100%, but you can sort of see the creek on, you know, you can see the creek and the wetland, which is quite a distance from my property. I have, I've used the mapping system to show the distances from the property to the, you know, to the wetland, and also measured them myself with tape and paste them off. So from the edge of, the first line says distance to the stream, so it's 40 meters from the edge of my property to where there's actually water in the stream. And the water in the stream currently, when I was out there Monday, is 1 inch deep and about 12 inches wide. The second measurement is the distance to the transition zone. So as you walk out of the forest and you're in the wetland, you know, there's bulrushes, there's no trees. And then when you walk back and you're back on solid ground in the tree envelope, that's 29 meters from my property line. And then from my property line on the south lot, which is the lot in concern, there's an additional 20 or so meters before the development of a house. So in total, there's 48 meters between where a house would exist and where the transition or that zone would start.
Okay. All right. At this point, I'll open it up to committee for any.
Well, then I want to speak to the snowplow area.
All right.
To turn around.
Quickly, if you would.
Now, as Kelsey mentioned, we had a on-site meeting with Brandon, Kevin, Kelsey, and myself. Also, my son-in-law Luke Barker was there. And just want to sort of find my place here. Yeah, I asked for the meeting, and the meeting took place on April 8th. And I wanted to make the point, the town is asking me to provide a wetland evaluation to establish a 30-meter buffer, and I think I can do that very easily. But at the same time, I pointed out that, you know, the town has been plowing Rice Lane, dumping the snow, salt, on my property that extends 70 feet beyond the town's property, and in a 50-foot wide swath that is about 17 meters from the wetland. So my question is, why are you insisting that I do a wetland study to make sure I'm within the 30 meters at the same time that the town is dumping snow there and intends to dump snow there in the future. So, basically, I think if I was to go ahead and do the environmental study, it wouldn't affect where a building could take place on my property, but it would affect where the town can dump snow. And so if the town can't dump snow near that wetland, then that's an issue for me when I go to sell my lots. So I made that point. Now also, basically what I said at the meeting is that if we can sort of call the wetland what it is, which is really just a drainage area, the town can continue to dump snow from Rice Lane there, and, that shouldn't be an issue. I said I would give the town whatever land it needed to build the appropriate turnaround. So I got a response from Brandon. Said due to the tight road allowances, I feel it best that you, Kevin, and myself meet again on site with your survey, try to field fit a proposed turnaround that would meet the needs of all parties. If an agreement in concept can be accomplished, this would be a final agreement. So he seems willing to meet with me and see where we can put snow and how we can turn around. And so basically what I'll just sort of sum up by saying, if you grant the severance and I sell my property, the new landowner will still need to come forth with a site plan once they know where they would want to build on the property. And at that time, the planning can, if he wants to build closer, he'd have to do the ESI to satisfy that requirement. So my understanding is that I need to demonstrate that the proposed lots can support a single detached dwelling and meet the snow plowing requirements. I believe I've done that. And I'm asking the committee to approve the severance, and I'll work with Brandon and Kevin to establish a snow storage and turnaround area.
All right, thank you. At this point, I'm going to open it to committee. Any comments or questions from committee members? Mr. Donald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. It's really just a comment rather than questions. I don't find I think that the staff request is entirely appropriate. I don't think there's anything unreasonable in asking for environmental studies. My second comment is I've been in Rice Lane once in my time in Huntsville, and I do recollect that it was a very constrained environment. It was very narrow. There were lots of properties given the size of the lane. And one thing that really bothers me is that the request to resolve the proposed snow turnaround is being deferred to future owners. And I think if the land is to be severed for profit, then the snow turnaround should be resolved prior to that, not left up to the subsequent owners. My personal opinion. So I fully support the staff's recommendation to deny.
All right, any other comment? No. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I guess my comments would be that if Riverstone has provided information that they have the studies and they haven't done anything, we don't know how currently or how current those studies are. So I tend to agree with staff in that respect. And we all have to remember that wherever we live, the demand for these kind of things is so great that we can't expect to have things done in a 3-month period or even a 6-month period sometimes. So patience is something that we, at this committee, I guess, understand and respect that we have to do due process, and if a new study's required, a new study's required.
All right. I too, just have a couple comments. So I hear your frustration. It seems very simple. I just want to sever the land off. Just let, sever it off, and then someone else can build on it, and they would have to go jump through the hoops. That's not our process. However, I'm eager for some more housing, and these look like small lots that could be developed and be wonderful new housing. So I think that's wonderful. The need for a wetland study, it's not just about saving turtles, it's also about flood waters and how it drains from the land. So I feel that's important. The turnaround seems very, something that could be easily resolved from what I see and what I know, but that's not my wheelhouse or my place to actually make any judgment on that. So at this point, I'm going to ask the applicant, would you like this application deferred so that studies could be done, or potentially it could be denied and that would be the end of it?
Okay, if I was to provide this study, what position am I going to be in when they say, as I mentioned earlier, that the building wouldn't be within, that restricted area, but the snow plowing would be?
So that's really information that we don't have until we get the study. And this committee can't really speak to that. It has to be expert information.
Well, I mean, I guess the other concern is something has to take place this winter. As the turnaround exists now, there's no room to turn around or dump snow, and that's what the town has been doing for many decades. So if I'm going to ask for a wetland study, I'm also going to have to ask, the town to look at what they're going to do this winter, because I can't foresee allowing them to continue to dump snow on my property.
Correct. So again, that's out of our purview. That would be another process with town staff, and
Okay.
so.
Okay, so I would ask then that it be deferred until the environmental study is complete.
All right, then I will ask committee members if anyone is wishing to defer this. Councillor Fitzgerald, and seconding, okay, Helena Renwick. All right, so we need a moment to get a motion together. All right. Moved by Councillor Fitzgerald, seconded by Helena Renwick. Be it resolved that the matter of consent application B 28 to 29, 2022 HTE Wolf be postponed to provide the applicant additional time to provide a scoped environmental impact study prepared by a qualified professional to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville, and revise the application where necessary to address recommendations of the scoped EIS and the final turning circle designated to the satisfaction of the town. Is that appropriate, Kelsey and Richard? All right. I didn't read the original one. Do I need to?
Oh, shoot, I guess yes.
All right, here we go. Moved by Council Fitzgerald, seconded by Kenneth Donald. Be it resolved that Committee of Adjustment deny consent application B 2829, 2022 HTE, the purpose and effect of which is the creation of 2 new residential lots. That's the original motion. So you've heard the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? And that's carried. And all in favor of the motion as amended? And that's carried.
Thank you.
Okay, we got one left. Oh, that's why you're leaving. Mr. Clark is on the hot seat. You can go ahead when you're ready.
So, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. The subject property is located at 135 Springfield Road. This property has an approximate area of 7.8 hectares with 266 meters of frontage on Springfield Road. The lands are developed with a single detached residential dwelling and detached garage. Surrounding uses are rural residential in nature. The lot is designated rural in the town official plan, is zoned rural residential, and is within the rural residential precinct in the CPP bylaw. The application before you is a consent application to create 1 new rural residential lot that's approximately 2 hectares in area with 134 meters of frontage on Springfield Road. The retained lot would have an area of approximately 5.8 hectares and 132 meters of frontage on Springfield Road. The official plan contains policies that require new lots within the rural area to be sized to appropriately accommodate their use. In this instance, the lot is used as a rural residential lot. Minimum lot requirements for rural residential lots include lots that are a minimum of 2 hectares in area and 134 meters of frontage. In consideration of these requirements, the proposed new lot conforms with respect to area and frontage, but results in a slightly undersized retained lot with respect to frontage at 132 meters, whereas 134 meters is required. The number of rural residential lots permitted to be created in the rural area are also addressed in the official plan policies. These policies are to be applied in the rural area, notwithstanding the minimum lot requirements just noted. And they cap the number of new rural residential lots that may be severed from an existing lot as existed in June 2006 at 3. Given that the proposed new lot represents the 5th such lot to be severed, the proposed development would exceed the 3-lot cap for rural residential lot severances from a 2006 existing lot. And just for this committee's convenience, the 2006 existing lot is shown in a green boundary and highlighted in white, and applications to sever land from it occurred in 2009 to the north, 2019 to the south, and there were 3 lots created through those 2019 applications. So this one would represent a fifth lot. The subject lands are identified as being within the Fairy Lake Wave Cut Notch Muskoka Heritage Area. According to the Natural Heritage evaluation of Muskoka, completed as part of Muskoka's Heritage Area program, this heritage area was established to protect a distinctive landform defined as a wave-cut notch and foreshore platform of historic Lake Algonquin, which was a glacial lake that existed approximately 12,000 years ago. And apparently this feature is unique Muskoka-wide, and that's why it's considered a special place. Policies in the official plan note that development should generally be situated outside the boundaries of Muskoka heritage areas, and if proposed within 120 meters, it may only be permitted if a technical report is submitted, which demonstrates that there will be no negative impact on the natural feature or its function. It's noted that a 2019 environmental impact study submitted in support of the 3 2019 consent applications did review this feature in relation to those applications, but did not do so in relation to the current proposal. As such, it would not be in keeping with the natural heritage feature protection policies of our official plan to approve this development, as it has not been demonstrated that development can proceed on the proposed severed lot without resulting in negative impacts on this natural heritage feature. It should be noted that areas containing hazardous forest types for wildland fires, with areas identified in Appendix A of our official plan as needing further evaluation, are present within and adjacent to the proposed severed lot. Although staff is not recommending approval of this application, we note that a wildlife fire hazard assessment or wildlife fire assessment would be or should be required as a condition of any decision to approve this application. This would be similar to the requirements imposed on the adjacent lots that were severed in 2019. Site plan control would then be used to implement those recommendations. Just a few site photos of the property taken from Springfield Road, and a few shots of the existing development. This application was circulated in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, and no comments were provided by the public. Comments were received from the district and are appended to the report as attachment number 4. District staff noted that a decision on this application would be premature at this time and should be deferred pending satisfactory completion of a site evaluation by a qualified professional to address relevant official plan policies relating to the protection of the Muskoka heritage area. To protect rural character and encourage growth that is compatible with the rural landscape and appropriate to the existing and planned infrastructure available, as well as the valuable natural resources and unique natural heritage constraints common in rural areas, such as the Fairy Lake Wave Cut Notch Muskoka Heritage Area, which is all required to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, the town has official plan policies, as I noted earlier, to discourage fragmentation of rural lands into smaller rural residential lots that are difficult and costly to service and can lead to conflict with other traditional rural uses. This application appears not to conform to the policies of the town official plan, nor be consistent with the provincial policy statement. As such, staff is recommending that the application be denied. As committee is aware and has heard, we do have a community planning permit bylaw, which was approved in July but is not in effect. And it should be noted that lot requirements for these lands in that bylaw include a minimum area of 2 hectares and a minimum frontage of 134 meters, similar to our official plan. And a Class 3 permit approval would be required to authorize a variation from these minimum requirements. And having regard to the provisions of the CPP bylaw, staff would not be in a position to recommend approval of that application in consideration of the Muskoka heritage areas and the 3-lot cap I reviewed earlier. And I'd be happy to take any questions committee might have.
All right, thank you. I see Savas. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to keep my presentation brief. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that'll just help kind of the flow.
Okay.
But I know you guys are on a tight timeline here for the next meeting. Thank you. So as you likely have guessed, I'm here as agent for the applicants, Ms. Cool and Mr. Jenkins, for their consent application that you've heard described by Mr. Clark. I won't replicate any of the information already provided. I'll just jump right into the concerns and stuff. Just, there's your sketch. You've seen it already, so I'll pass along with that. So staff has raised 4 concerns with this application. That's the need for a wildland fire risk assessment that hasn't been provided, a need for an updated site evaluation report with respect to the Muskoka Heritage Area that has been mentioned. There's a frontage deficiency for the retained lands, and that it exceeds the number of rural residential lots permitted on the land since June of 2006, as outlined in the official plan. So just to attack wildland fire first, Mr. Clark had mentioned that there's an area, which is the purple area that you see here on this map. This is this pine needs evaluation area, and the subject property is proposed to be in this area right here. So there is a little bit of it that bleeds into the property. Now, this is the current district and town official plan mapping, but the district has actually come across new mapping from the province since their official plans, your official plan, and the district official plan has been implemented. And this is what it looks like today. So the pine needs evaluation area has been, in this property, being removed. The green, I believe, is a moderate risk now, and the purple and the light pink or purple here is now considered low risk areas. So the proposed lot is in this area right here. And as you can see, there's no, the needs evaluation area that would normally trigger this review has been removed and scaled back to a moderate potential. I feel given, also you can, as you can imagine, forests don't follow a nice grid-like pattern like they've shown here on this mapping. Given, looking at the property, I know there is some pine areas in through here, and there's like a driveway that comes down this property. I feel like it's outside of that area, and it's close enough that it just sort of bleeds in a little bit, that anybody, like, there's obviously areas outside of these risk areas that can be constructed upon. And I feel like, the study of this case probably, particularly because the study has been done for the previous consent applications that end up creating this lot, I feel like we might be doing a little bit overkill just requiring another study for this particular application, given the updated mapping. So the second thing is the Muskoka Heritage Area. So as Richard has mentioned, it's called the Fairy Lake Wave Cut Notch Muskoka Heritage Area. And I just want to read you the description of what this is, because this is a different one for me. I've never come across something like this before. It's described as a small geological site approximately 500 meters east of Timber Bay on Fairy Lake at an elevation of 335 meters above sea level. The feature consists of a 4 to 5 meter tall bluff with a foreshore platform approximately 100 meters wide, consisting of 1 meter of fine nearshore sand overlaying glacial till. The northern edge of the platform is bounded by a steep bedrock controlled descent of about 50 meters to the shore of Fairy Lake. The significance of this landform is that it is distinct and relatively unusual in Muskoka. So basically, it's not like your typical natural heritage feature. It's not like a wetland or a stream or something that we can quantify that we normally come across. It's simply a landform that's just unique and doesn't happen. It doesn't occur in Muskoka very often. We don't know exactly where this is, but we know it's generally in this area. As Richard had mentioned, there was a study that was prepared for when this property was created that looked for this, and they did not find it on this property. But there's a little bit of confusion as to what parts of the property they were looking at when they prepared that study. They were looking at the severed lots that were proposed. And those severed lots were south of these lands because these were the retained lots. So it looks like as if they may have skipped over looking particularly where this proposed lot is being created for this feature and looked at the remainder of the property. So they didn't find it then. I'm not saying I'm an ecological expert here, but I think there is there is a desire to move this application forward, and you'll see that as I go on here, to do a study, or at least update the site evaluation report to look for this feature on the severed lands. But there's just a couple matters that I'd like to discuss before we get to that point. So the frontage deficiency, the official plan, section C 8.7.4, it states that unless otherwise specified, the minimum requirements for a new rural residential lot will be 2 hectares in lot area with 134 meters of road frontage. So as Richard has mentioned, the severed lot complies with this frontage requirement and area requirement, but the retained lot is short by 2 meters less than what is normally required under the official plans. But there is a section of the official plan, F 2.1.6, that states where numbers or values are specified in text, such quantities are intended as guidelines. Deviation from these numerical requirements, where they are minor and restricted in nature, may be permitted, provided the intent of the plan is maintained. I believe the 2-meter deviation is, pretty much as close as we can get to it. It's almost exactly on what is required, and I feel like this is a minor deviation, and I feel that the lots still meet the intent of the official plan. So finally, this is the one I think that, caused me the most concern, or at least my attention was drawn to this policy. So as Richard has already mentioned, there is a section of the official plan that caps to a maximum of 3 new rural residential lots being severed from an existing lot of record as in existence of June 2006. Now this is a little hard to follow in terms of there's no real tracking system to this. So it's been determined that there was 3 lots created in 2019 and 1 additional lot created in 2009 from what existed in 2006. So when we look at the, I guess the intent behind this policy, because this policy didn't exist in the official plan prior to 2019, this was added in 2019. But at that point, the 2014 PPS was in effect, and that PPS said in the rural lands that only limited residential uses were permitted on rural lands. And that was the intent behind saying limited residential, was to focus development in settlement areas of Ontario and to not fragment the rural areas. The Town of Huntsville official plan was adopted in 2019 under that 2014 PPS. And Huntsville's response to looking to further sort of restrict development in the rural area and follow that limited residential guideline was to increase frontage from 60 meters at the time to 134 meters, which is about 2.2 times the amount that was previously required, and that the minimum lot area would go from 1 hectare to 2 hectares, which is 2 times, and also adding the maximum number of lots under that policy. So there was basically a response that said, in order to limit residential in the rural area, we're making the lots bigger, and we're limiting how many you can put on a property. So the 2020 PPS comes out a year later, and they changed that wording. They changed the wording from limited residential to locally appropriate residential on rural lands. And I believe, I don't work for the province, but I believe there was a little bit of problems in terms of a lot of municipalities, particularly in Northern Ontario, to be able to implement a lot of development in a settlement area when their settlement areas are quite a bit smaller than you see in Southern Ontario. And in some municipalities north of here, for instance, there are no settlement areas, so it's difficult to actually have housing increase when you don't have the settlement areas that Southern Ontario has. So you see that in the surrounding area of this property, it consists primarily of rural residential lots of frontage in areas that are not conducive to further division, except for the subject lands. And the reason why I bring this up is basically, you see here where that dot is, this is the subject lands, the proposed lot is in this area right here. Of all the properties that are left along Springfield Road, there isn't one that would be able to be further divided. So if there's ever to be one created in this area, that would be the last one. I feel like it's going to be this one. I don't think it would be out of character with the area. It would be conducive to the size and the shape of the existing lots, particularly actually bigger than I think most of the existing lots. And you really have an area that's highly vegetated. You drive down that road, it's hard to see any of the dwellings that are actually constructed along that roadway. You basically just see a small cut in the trees where the driveways are as you drive by. I don't believe this lot would actually contribute to fragmentation of this area. I don't think it'd be incompatible with this area. I don't think it'd be out of character with this area. I think it'd be fully in character with this proposal. So therefore, I feel that character could be maintained. With character maintained, with environmental policy addressed in terms of wildland fire, and potentially, like I'll let you know, that the applicants are willing to do that study. And the minor frontage issue, the deficiency permitted, the only outstanding policy is that number of lots permitted per property. And finally, I will say that there is an official plan policy that sort of speaks to these situations, and it's F2.1.8, and it states that when individual policy should not be read or interpreted in isolation. The intent, goal, and objectives of all applicable policies must be considered together to determine conformity. It's a policy that doesn't really come out a lot in many applications, but really what I want to say is don't sit there and cherry pick one policy and say, well, it doesn't comply to that one, so we should say no. Read it as a whole. So with that in mind, my proposal, at least for discussion here today, is that the Committee of Adjustment approve the proposed lot with the condition that an updated site evaluation report by a qualified professional be prepared to the satisfaction of the Town of Huntsville and District of Muskoka, which confirms that the creation of a new lot and subsequent development of a residential use will not negatively impact the Fairy Lake, Wave, Cut, Notch, Muskoka Heritage Area, and that a 5126 agreement be entered into to implement those recommendations, if any, and of the site evaluation report, and that to make the proposed separate lot subject to site plan control. So because it's not a feature that, like a water course or something with a buffer or something along those lines, I feel what's going to happen is going to be a site evaluation report. They're either going to locate the feature or not locate the feature on the property. If they locate the feature on the property, they'll probably just give some recommendations as to how much site disturbance should occur and or where development should be placed on the property to avoid disturbing this feature. And I think that could be, implemented fairly easily through site plan control. And the reason why I asked that the Committee of Adjustment approve the application rather than defer it and get that report in first is that if the committee is going to have the issue with the number of lots per property policy, that's, as staff has mentioned in their report, the applicants don't want to spend the money looking for this feature and providing recommendations for it just to find out that it didn't matter anyways because the committee didn't want to approve the application to begin with. So that's why I say let's make this a condition of the approval, and if they can't satisfy that condition, the lot doesn't get created. So that's the way I'm approaching it. I think if we do it this way, I feel that it is consistent with the PPS, and it is in conformity with the official plan, and I think that the environmental policy side of things is taken care of as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for that. And committee members, comments or questions? There's lots to think about there.
Thanks for your presentation. It certainly helped me understand town's position and your client's position. So I'm grateful for that. I think that makes sense.
Mrs.
Thank
Renwick?
you, Chair Stone. I would have to concur with Mr. Donald. I really did appreciate the presentation. The fact that the one specific part of the frontage, the 2 meters, I think that is a minor variance that I think the committee could overlook or look through. The part about separating, in 2006, there was one separation of the property. Does that mean, and maybe this is a question for Richard, if I may, Chair Stone, once you separate that property, does the new property become now a new property, and does that still count towards the other properties being divided up? Like, you started as a whole, and then, okay.
Richard?
I think I answered.
Yes, thank you. Good question. So what we're doing is we're trying to say that there was an existing lot in 2006.
Right.
And what we're trying to address is, from that date, how many times should we be permitting lots to be severed from that
From the
existing
original.
2006 lot?
Okay.
And the policy says that it's notwithstanding anything to do with the lot size. There's just a cap. So and it says 3, and as you saw in that one diagram, there was 1 in 2009 and 3 in 2019. So this would be the 5th. Right. So notwithstanding consideration of lot size, you're supposed to apply this cap regardless of lot size. That's what our OP policy says.
Right.
So that's why, the 2 meters, I think I would agree, that's very slight.
Right.
I wouldn't be concerned with a 2 meter difference, but
No.
what the policy says is you're not supposed to consider lot sizes when applying that policy. You're supposed to try and prevent how many times a lot can be severed in the rural area.
Okay.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and thanks everyone for all the comments and for your presentation, Savis. My question, Richard, I guess is for you. When we consider the fire study, we talk about development. When is that triggered? Is that triggered when someone goes for a permit for building, or should it be triggered at this stage of land severance? I'm kind of iffy on how that should work.
Well, we always encourage that study to be done up front in order to figure out how feasible development on a new lot would be. There are different hazards, though. And in this instance, I think we've seen that there's some new mapping that shows that the hazard is not the same as what's in our official plan. That being said, I think the mapping is, what I always say is it's very broad, and you could see it's those squares, right? So what you really do want to encourage is that those studies occur on the ground to ground truth things and figure out where the hazard trees are or aren't. I will say, though, that in 2019, the lots were approved to be created with the completion of a wildland fire assessment as a condition of approval. So if that helps in any way.
Follow-up? So
Yeah, go ahead.
that did occur at that time?
Yeah.
Okay, and now that mapping has changed, it seems to me sometimes we're a little behind in the times when we're still making a requirement, and yet it may not be a physical requirement because of the new mapping that's available.
Well, the mapping still shows it on the property, so it does trigger the requirement, but it could be considered as a condition of approval, just to put that out there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Proposals? Anything?
I think I'd like to see an amendment to this, taking into consideration the conditions as presented or as suggested, and also any other considerations that may be required by planning department, that we revise this to approve the applicant's request. I'm not sure how we word it, but I'll leave that up to the experts.
All right. Comment or question from Councillor Fitzgerald?
In light of current circumstances and the amount of time this proposal is going to take, can we defer this with those proposals coming back?
Or do we just, can I ask,
I
Mr.
can
Clark?
help, I think. We do have an alternate recommendation ready to go based on what was presented by the planner. So we can help definitely get that over the finish line. And just wanted to make sure that I asked the question. The wildland fire assessment, in the language that has been provided, it wasn't included as a condition, but would this committee like to add that as a part of the condition, or is that?
Councillor Fitzgerald.
I really don't think, because when we get these assessments in and we look at the building envelope, so in my mind, from the new fire mapping I saw there and the required setbacks from the roads and everything, it's a non-factor.
All right, so do we have a seconder for Mr. Donald's motion? All right, Councillor Fitzgerald. All right, does staff need a moment? No, she's ready to go. I love that.
might even have time for lunch.
I didn't read the original motion. I will. Moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Helena Renwick. Be it resolved that Committee of Adjustment deny consent application B33, 2022 HTE for the creation of one new rural residential lot. And we have an amendment coming. Oh, my God. All right. I need my other glasses. All right. So the amendment is moved by Kenneth Donald, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Be it resolved that the following word deny be hereby deleted and replaced with approve, and that the following lines be inserted, conditional on a registrable description of the severed lot being submitted to the clerk, including all rights of ways and easements, along with a registered copy of the reference plan, the owner's taxes being in good standing, site inspection fee of $240 being paid to the town of Huntsville, a consent finalization fee in the amount of $190 being paid to the town of Huntsville, 5% cash in lieu of parkland being paid to the town of Huntsville on the severed lands, an updated site evaluation report prepared by a qualified professional being submitted to the satisfaction of the town of Huntsville and the District of Muskoka to confirm that the development can proceed without resulting in negative impacts to the Fairy Lake Wave Cut Notch Muskoka Heritage Area, and the lands being subject to an agreement with the town of Huntsville pursuant to Section 5126 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990, as amended, to implement the recommendation of the site evaluation report through site plan control or the community planning permit. Is there more? Is that it? All right, that's the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? And that's carried. All in favor of the original motion as amended? And that's carried. Whew. All right. Thank you, Savas. All right. With that, if there's nothing else, moved by Helena Renwick, seconded by Kenneth Donald, be it resolved that we do now adjourn at 12:29 p.m. All in favor? Wow, that's carried.